a young pregnant mother is killed in her home. This is one of those cases that grips the public and leaves them divided. On the surface, Michelle's life seemed perfect. A loving mother, successful career woman, and married to a charming man with a good job. But when she was murdered, a whole new side to what her life really was like came to light. So many questions arose about the events leading up to that tragic fall night. There were conflicting reports, suspicious actions, and missing pieces that made it hard to pin down the truth. So once you've heard the evidence, I want to hear what you think. Deadly Deep Dives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. Before we jump in, please let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Factor. I've shared Factor with all of you before, but if you're new here and you didn't know, I just had a baby 3 months ago, and it has been a wild ride. And eating well and also being able to quickly make meals is so important to me. Factor helps make that process stress-free. As a new mom, meal planning is the last thing on my mind. But with Factor, I'm set up for success. I can skip the grocery store, skip all the prep work, and I don't have to spend more than a couple minutes in the kitchen. No more time wasted cooking a meal that I'm way too tired to even enjoy. Instead, with Factor, I get chef-crafted, fresh and never frozen, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to my door. Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, which I've also tried in the past. And with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I love switching between the brands, and now all of you can enjoy the brands at a discount with me. There's over 35 meals to choose from each week with Factor, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more. Plus, with how busy I am with researching and filming and editing, I love that Factor now offers a bunch of snack options like breakfast foods and smoothies. I got the protein smoothies with caffeine, and I need it after those long nights with Mazzy. They also have small bites and juices, which I love to grab real fast and drink on my breaks. It helps keep me going no matter what's on my schedule that day. Right now, I'm trying to eat healthy and lose my baby weight before our wedding in July, so I chose Factor because they have options that make it so easy to stick to my goals. And I don't have to worry if things get a little hectic because Factor is flexible. I can change my order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, and I can pause or reschedule my deliveries anytime. Try it for yourself. Just head to factor75.com or click the link below in my description box and use code KIMBER50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code KIMBER50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. And thank you so much to Factor for sponsoring today's video. So really quickly, I have 2 fun announcements. 1, my contest is going on right now for you to name my Halloween series. Look below in the description box. You're gonna get a fall care package if you win. 2 winners, 1 for this channel, 1 for Dark Livity. We're also gonna put together a special piece of merchandise for you that only you will have. Second announcement, I'm going to be joining Annie Elise. If you don't know who she is, her channel is 10 to Life here on YouTube. She's also a true crime YouTuber. I'm going to be joining her at a live event in Orange County, California. All the information is going to be below, so if you want to see us discuss a case live and in person, meet us. John will also be there. Please look below for all of that information. Okay, now let's get into this video. And if you're anything like me, this video, this story, this case, it's going to make you very angry. Very, very angry. So let's begin. Michelle Marie Fisher was born on February 17th, 1977 to Linda and Alan Fisher in Long Island, New York. Long Island, if you've never heard of it before, I'm sure you have, it's a suburban hotspot. It's known for its beaches like Jones Beach, Fire Island, and to be a great summer getaway for New Yorkers. In 1980, 3 years after Michelle was born, she became an older sister when her sibling, Meredith, came into the world. And like most sisters, they had their bickering and fights, but they also had a very strong bond. They were always there for each other, especially when it truly mattered. Michelle's mom, Linda, was a dedicated school teacher at Sayville Junior High School, while her father, Alan, managed a successful car dealership. From a young age, Michelle had a nurturing nature. She would lovingly care for her Cabbage Patch dolls. She acted like they were real babies. She displayed tenderness that hinted at a compassionate person that she would eventually become. Growing up, Michelle was known for her confidence and her outgoing personality. She made friends very easily, and she kept them forever. Michelle attended Sayville High School, where she was the co-captain of her cheerleading squad. She actually attended the school the same time as actress Melissa Joan Hart. If you know, you know. If you're my age, you probably do. Cheerleading was one of Michelle's passions, and she was very good at it. During her senior year of high school, she was chosen as co-captain of her cheerleading team, and she led that team to win the Long Island Cheerleading Association's championship in 1995. Michelle also enjoyed participating in talent shows and musicals. She loved to make other people laugh as well. She was even a member of a lip-syncing team, and they sang "Do You Love Me" in a regional competition, and that group won, which just goes to show you the fun-loving type of personality that Michelle had. But outside of cheerleading and extracurricular activities, Michelle was a dedicated student. She loved to learn, and she genuinely enjoyed serving others. She was a member of the National Honor Society. Michelle's academic journey was as impressive as her vibrant personality. Her intelligence and dedication quickly stood out, particularly in French and Russian, and she showcased her passion for learning other languages. However, as Michelle reached her teenage years, the cracks in her parents' marriage became impossible to ignore. Linda and Alan had been in marriage counseling for over a decade at this point, and their efforts just faltered. They barely spoke to each other, they slept in separate bedrooms, and although they tried to stay together for the sake of their daughters, the strain was undeniable, and eventually they ended up getting a divorce. But Michelle had a lot going on to keep her busy at the time and her mind off of it. In the fall of 1995, after graduating from high school, Michelle chose to attend North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is the capital of the state. It's also part of the Research Triangle, which is a region known for its high concentration of research institutions and tech companies. The city had a population of 500,000 people who enjoyed its vibrant mix of history and innovation. For students, the city offered plenty of opportunities for academic and even personal growth. NC State is actually known for a competitive admissions process, but Michelle's exceptional academic record earned her a spot at the school. It's one of the largest universities in the state with strong programs in engineering, technology, and sciences, and this made it an ideal choice for Michelle. North Carolina State's Wolfpack athletics team is a big source of pride for the university, and Michelle became an enthusiastic part of this culture. She joined the university's cheer squad during her freshman year, and in 1996, she experienced a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when the team was selected to perform in Atlanta at the opening ceremony for the Olympics. By the second year of her finance degree, Michelle had pledged to the Alpha Delta Pi sorority, which didn't leave much time for much else. In the end, she decided to give up cheerleading, and she put all of her energy into her coursework and her sorority. However, she remained a loyal fan, cheering on the Wolfpack from the stands. Michelle excelled, like I said, academically, and she earned straight A's every single semester. Her mom supported her education by purchasing a condo for Michelle to live in near the North Carolina State campus, and she was able to do this with money from the divorce settlement. Michelle lived there with her close friends and sorority sisters, with whom she forged lifelong friendships, including a special bond with another member, Michelle Money. To make sure they could tell them apart, since both of their names were Michelle, they called Michelle Fisher Big Michelle and Michelle Money Little Michelle, because Michelle Fisher was taller, but she didn't like to be called Big Michelle, so they ended up calling her Fish for her last name Fisher. After completing her studies, Michelle passed the CPA exam on her very first try, and soon she began her professional career in downtown Raleigh at a firm called Deloitte & Touche. As she transitioned from a student to a young professional, Michelle's discipline, charm, and ambition continued to define her path forward. By the time graduation rolled around in 2001, Michelle had completed a bachelor's and a master's degree in tax law, and that's why it didn't take her long to land that job. She was finally beginning to forge ahead as an independent career woman. In February of 2001, as she was approaching her 21st birthday, Michelle Fisher had a chance encounter. She was enjoying a night out with her friends at Have a Nice Day Cafe in Raleigh when fate intervened. While just messing around with his college buddies, a man named Jason Young accidentally bumped into Michelle, which caused her to spill her wine. Jason, as charming as he was, he immediately offered to replace her drink, and this small act led to the two of them chatting for a while. Then Michelle pulled him onto the dance floor, and they spent the rest of the night together. That's when they discovered they had some things in common. They were both recent graduates of North Carolina State University and were avid Wolfpack fans. At the time, Michelle was living with her roommate and very good friend Shelly, and it was raining really hard, so they decided that night to all go back to their place, including Jason Young. They spent the rest of the night just hanging out and getting to know one another, and eventually this sparked the beginning of a new relationship, and they made a really attractive pair. Michelle with her big white smile, dark brown almond-shaped eyes, and her wavy brown hair, and Jason's blonde, shaggy hair, his blue eyes, and his chiseled jawline. They were opposites in looks, and some would even say personality, but they made a good match. Even though he was 3 years older than Michelle, though, Jason was a lot more carefree and not as sophisticated as she was. Michelle was way more serious, although she did have a fun side as well. But Jason, he was like the life of the party. He was loud, outgoing, and definitely over the top. He was different from the guys that Michelle usually dated. And later that night, Michelle handed her phone number over to him to tell him to call her the next day, which he did. Then they went on several dates, and it didn't take long before Michelle fell hard for Jason. She began telling all of her friends about her new boyfriend, and they were having a lot of fun together. They were both in the early stages of starting their post-college careers. They loved the outdoors, and they loved football. One of their favorite dates was to attend their college football team's games as often as they could. At the time, Jason was living in Brevard, North Carolina with his mom and his stepdad, but he was willing to make the nearly 5-hour drive to Raleigh to visit Michelle very frequently. He worked at Black & Decker, and he used his earnings to fund these visits, and before long, Jason decided to move closer to Michelle, and he relocated to Raleigh with one of his friends. That friend was Ryan Shad. At this point, Jason was working at Pan American Labs. But let's talk about his past for a moment. Jason's background was rooted in a close-knit family. His mother, Pat Young, was a 5th grade teacher in a small elementary school in Transylvania County, and Jason Lynn Young was the middle child of 3 siblings. He was born in 1974. Jason had an older sister, Kim, and a younger sister, Heather. But then tragedy struck the Young family early on when Jason's father, Bob, passed away from cancer when Jason was only 5 years old. The loss left the family struggling financially, and a year later, Pat remarried, bringing George McIntyre into Jason's life as his stepdad. Growing up, Jason was the typical pest of a brother. He would often tease his sisters, but his magnetic personality made up for it. It was hard for anyone to stay mad at him for long. He had the natural ability to make people laugh, and it was this charisma that made him very popular at Brevard High School, where he was voted best all-around student during his senior year. His teachers even nominated him for the school's Hall of Fame. Now, during the summers, Jason worked at a camp. It was an all-girls Christian camp where he was adored by a lot of the campers, especially a girl named Carol Ann Sowerby, who had known him since she was 6 years old. Jason had been her swim instructor, and she had a childhood crush on him that went into adulthood. This wasn't actually uncommon. Jason was very popular with the ladies. When it was time to go to college, Jason had always been a loyal Wolfpack fan, and he decided to go to North Carolina State University. That was a dream come true for him. In 1993, he completed his freshman year, but then he took a year off to go hiking in the Appalachian Trail with a high school friend before returning to NC State in 1994. Once back at the school, however, Jason's focus wasn't entirely on academics. He wasn't the worst student, but his grades definitely took a backseat to his real interest, which was partying, attending Wolfpack games, and meeting women. In 1998, Jason graduated from NC State, but he and his friends, they were still clinging to their college days. They pooled all of their money together to buy lifetime season tickets to the Wolfpack games so they could continue tailgating and partying even though they weren't in college anymore. Jason's friends actually referred to him, wait for it, as Horn Dog. Okay? This was a nod to his disinterest in serious relationships. He was a player. And I haven't heard that nickname in years, maybe even decades. Horn Dog? I think you know what it refers to, though. During his time at NC State, he was actually an RA, a resident advisor for a dormitory there. And as the horn dog that he was, he used this position to get closer to the female students. Classy. Jason didn't have a good reputation for being an all-around good guy or someone that was even going places in life. He was known more for his reputation as being a frat boy, having the frat boy mentality, where success is measured by how much and how often you can drink and how many women you can sleep with. But in 1997, Jason's carefree days of partying were briefly interrupted when he met a woman named Genevieve Cargol, and the two of them began a serious romance. So I guess they can be tamed. Well, I guess maybe not, because in October of 1999, Jason proposed to Genevieve, but their relationship was rocky. And despite multiple conversations about Jason's love for partying and how it was getting in the way of their relationship, Jason wasn't interested in stopping, which led Genevieve to break off their engagement in January of 2000. Jason was known for his wild sense of humor, and he liked to play practical jokes, which often bordered on being inappropriate. These included sexual innuendo jokes, and it was usually around the wrong audience. He was also infamous for his genitalia tricks, dick tricks, if you will. The bat wing, if you know, you know. That was classic Jason, but these jokes were not well received by everyone viewing them. But to his friends, these antics were just part of his fun-loving, mischievous personality. Yeah, I don't think that would go over well with many people, but with his frat boy friends, they thought it was really funny. And even though Jason often came across as immature and impulsive, his charm and charisma made it difficult for people to resist his company. I wish it wasn't true, but you'll see that it definitely is for some reason, especially women. And when Michelle and Jason met, she wasn't looking for anything serious. So maybe his character traits or his lack of a decent paying job didn't bother her at the time. At this point, Michelle was in her early 20s and she didn't need to see him every evening and weekend. She had plenty of friends to do social activities with that were keeping her very busy, and also, of course, her career. So the casual arrangement seemed to work out for both of them, at least initially. But all of that changed in 2003 when Michelle found out she was pregnant with Jason's child. She knew right away that she was going to go through with this pregnancy with or without Jason's support. She had a strong network of family and friends who would help her. But of course, she hoped that Jason would stand by her side and take this surprise seriously. She had been unsure of how he was going to react, and she was devastated by his initial response. When Michelle told Jason she was pregnant, he was shocked, to say the least. He told Michelle that he enjoyed his freedom, and he wasn't ready for a child or for marriage. Jason was terrified at the thought of becoming a father. He told Michelle there was no way he could handle the responsibilities of both fatherhood and marriage. And this news left Michelle heartbroken. But Jason did say that he would support any decision she made. Michelle told him how she felt, and they agreed to give the relationship a serious shot. Just 1 month after this conversation, Jason appeared to have a major change of heart. He ended up proposing to Michelle with a makeshift rubber band ring, explaining it was just a placeholder while he was waiting for the diamond one. Michelle was overwhelmed with joy, and she accepted his proposal. She was hopeful that this marked a turning point in the relationship. On August 12th, 2003, the couple was married in a quiet, private ceremony at the Wake County Public Safety Center in downtown Raleigh. Just a justice of peace, Michelle's mother Linda, and a stranger served as witnesses. Even though this was a very low-key event, Michelle had much bigger plans for a more elaborate celebration later on. She wanted to share this moment with her friends and her family, and she quickly began organizing a second lavish ceremony for October. With her pregnancy progressing, she was eager for the wedding to happen as soon as possible. I think she gave her friends just 3 weeks' notice that it was going to happen. This might sound quite romantic, but there was a much more practical reason for their nuptials, other than just the fact that she was pregnant. Michelle had a good job, but it didn't come with benefits like health insurance. But Jason's job did. So by getting married, Michelle and their unborn child would be covered. For those of you that are watching and are not in the United States, over here, it can cost upward of $10,000, and that's with no complications. Here in LA, it's usually closer to $30,000. At least it was for me recently. So if you don't have insurance, that's what you're going to pay. Jason, with his usual carefree attitude, he allowed Michelle and her sister and her mom to take full control over the wedding planning. He only had 3 stipulations. The ceremony couldn't fall on a Wolfpack game day, because he had to go to every game. He could invite as many guests as he wanted, and there had to be unlimited beer. I guess once you're a frat boy, you're always a frat boy. But anyway, on October 10th, 2003, Michelle and Jason tied the knot once more, and this time in a grand ceremony held at the luxurious Longview Center in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. Jason's rescue dog, a black Labrador named Mr. Garrison, even served as the ring bearer, and he carried the rings down the aisle dressed in a custom doggy tuxedo. It was clear that there was nothing surface level about their affection. It might have seemed like this was a marriage of convenience at first, but anyone who would have thought that way would change their mind after witnessing this wedding. Michelle and Jason seemed very much in love. Michelle's professional life flourished after this even more when she secured a role as a financial specialist in the accounting department at Progress Energy. This is a Fortune 500 company and one of the largest utilities in the Southeast. Known for her drive and meticulous planning, Michelle had always balanced her career aspirations with her personal goals. And even during her pregnancy, she was really ready to just get back to work as soon as possible after giving birth. It was clear that Michelle balancing her career and motherhood was very important. As Michelle prepared for motherhood, her younger sister Meredith offered to support her by actually moving to Raleigh to help her care for the baby. This was a gesture that Michelle greatly appreciated. And by now, Jason and Michelle were living together. And on March 29th, 2004, they welcomed their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth Young, into the world. The birth was a little more complicated than expected, as Cassidy turned breech in the final weeks of Michelle's pregnancy, requiring her to undergo a C-section. But despite the unexpected turn of events, Michelle embraced motherhood wholeheartedly. From breastfeeding to changing diapers and dressing Cassidy in cute little onesies, Michelle found joy in every aspect of caring for her daughter. Michelle was compassionate. When it came to motherhood, she truly understood the meaning of living in the moment. She was deeply connected to her child, and she never complained about the sleepless nights or the toll that pregnancy took on her body. I could tell by the pictures that I saw, she loved this little girl more than anything in this world. Those early months were made even better by the support that she knew she would get from her mom and sister. The three of them were very close. Her sister Meredith did end up moving to Raleigh to help out. And when Michelle returned to work as a senior financial consultant in the tax department of Progress Energy, Meredith took on the role of a nanny. But a townhouse or an apartment that they were living in could feel really cramped with a growing family. So by 2005, Michelle and Jason had settled into life as a family of three and were eagerly searching for the perfect home to raise their daughter, Cassidy. Michelle had long dreamed of owning a classic home with shutters, a white picket fence, and a large backyard, a place where Cassidy could play and they could build their future together. This dream came true when they discovered a colonial-style brick home in the Enchanted Oaks subdivision, nestled in South Raleigh. This home at the time was close to $400,000. It had 3 stories. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom brick home at 5108 Birchleaf Drive, and it had everything they wanted. A spacious front and backyard that her daughter and dog could enjoy, with an attached garage, a fireplace, a back porch with a barbecue grill, and so much more. Michelle even got the shutters that she wanted. She didn't have the white picket fence, but there was a nice size front porch with a white railing and rocking chairs. Plus, it was only a short walk to the community pool and the tennis courts. Just before Memorial Day weekend, Michelle and Jason became the proud owners of their new home. Jason made a very sweet gesture by planting yellow and orange daisies, Michelle's favorite flowers, by the mailbox, a personal touch that made their new home feel even more special. Everything was really coming together, except there was one thing, or I should say one person, that seemed to be coming between the couple. Michelle remained incredibly close to her mother, Linda. She had always been a guiding figure in Michelle's life. Even after becoming a mother herself, Michelle relied on Linda for advice. The two of them spoke every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, with Michelle often calling her mom on her drive home from work. Linda was a junior high school teacher in New York, and she took full advantage of her summers off. She would travel to Raleigh to spend extended time with Michelle and her new baby. During the summer of 2004, Linda had stayed with them for weeks, helping Michelle adjust to life as a new mom. However, as many people do know, dealing with the in-laws can be difficult, and as Linda got to know Jason more and more, their relationship was far from harmonious. Their personalities clashed from the very beginning, and things only worsened when Linda lived with them for that summer. Jason had started working from home at this time. He had gotten a job as a traveling pharmaceutical sales rep. So while he was home and Linda was staying with them, he found her to be overbearing and critical, especially when it came to how he would care for Cassidy. He felt that Linda was constantly judging him, and it created a lot of tension in the household. And even when Linda went back home to New York, the distance did little to ease the strain between them because Michelle had the habit of calling her mom to vent if something wasn't going right between her and Jason. Whenever the couple disagreed and got into a big argument, Michelle would immediately call her mom. She would often yell and cry as she was sharing all of her frustrations. The postpartum period can be really tough in and of itself, and the couple really hadn't known each other that long before so many changes happened in their lives. Jason found these calls to be unbearable. When he would hear Michelle talking to her mom, it took an emotional toll on him, and it further strained his already rocky relationship with Michelle's mom. He'd even asked Michelle to please stop involving her mother in their disputes, knowing it only solidifies Linda's low opinion of him. Linda never thought that Jason was good enough for her daughter or for her granddaughter. She viewed him as lazy and immature, and despite Jason's pleas, Michelle continued turning to her mom for comfort, creating a growing divide in their marriage. Linda's influence, whether intentional or not, fueled the friction between Michelle and Jason, leaving him feeling isolated in his very own home. This constant back and forth between Michelle and her mother and Jason, it only added more pressure to an already tense situation. And before long, it wasn't just Linda who had a poor opinion of Jason. Meredith wasn't a big fan of him either. She and her mother saw him for what he was before the couple got together, a player. Someone who was more likely to put himself first rather than Michelle. Even though Michelle had agreed to marry him and they were playing happy family together, Michelle and Linda's opinion of him hadn't changed that much over the years. One thing that really bothered Michelle and that she expressed to her mom and her sister was that even though Jason said he would support Michelle and her decision to continue with the pregnancy, it seemed like he resented her for it. Whenever they would get into an argument about something, he would get so angry and he would blame her for tying him down. But of course, many of us can say things in anger that we don't really mean. I think we've all been guilty of that. But as time went on and everyone settled into the changes, things seemed to get back on track. They weren't great, but Michelle told her mom that she was holding on to a vision for a perfect family with a loving father and mother for Cassidy. She had the dog, the house, the baby. All she really needed was for Jason to get fully on board. And Michelle was willing to wait for that to happen because she believed wholeheartedly that one day Jason would change. And actually, it did seem like he was finally coming around. In the spring of 2006, when little Cassidy was about 2, Michelle discovered she was pregnant with baby number 2. And this time, things were a lot more stable than before. And both she and Jason were overjoyed by the prospect of expanding their family even more. Michelle's hope for a perfect future was renewed. And at this time, Jason was more excited than ever about the new addition to their family. They had been talking about having another baby, and with Jason's positive reaction, Michelle felt one step closer to her dreams. And Jason was desperately wanting a son to preserve his family name, since he was the only son born to his deceased father. He also wanted Cassidy to have a brother close in age, so they could be raised close together like he was with his sisters Heather and Kim. They were so excited to share the news with their families. The couple decided they wanted to tell them in person. Jason's family was going to be first, so they made that 280-mile drive to Jason's parents' home in Brevard for the weekend. The visit was pleasant, and Jason's parents shared in the couple's excitement about the pregnancy. On the Sunday morning, a few hours before the family were due to drive back home, Jason's parents offered to watch Cassidy while Jason and Michelle went out for coffee by themselves, which was a very rare treat for parents of a busy toddler. So they jumped at the opportunity, and they enjoyed a relaxed breakfast in the downtown area. However, what started as a celebration soon turned into a nightmare. It's crazy how fast our lives can change. It can happen in an instant, in the blink of an eye. On that drive back to his parents' place, Jason lost control of the SUV he was driving. They were on a mountain road, and the vehicle veered sharply to the right, nearly careening off of the side of the road. In a split second, as Jason attempted to correct the steering wheel, the vehicle slid off the road and plunged down a steep 100-foot embankment and crashed into the slow-moving French Broad River. Panic set in as water quickly began to flood the vehicle, and the couple was faced with the real possibility that they would drown. What was meant to be a quiet moment for the couple took this terrifying turn. But in an incredible stroke of luck, someone had seen the accident and they called 911. Emergency services arrived in time to pull Jason and Michelle from the partially submerged vehicle, and despite the trauma of the crash, neither Michelle or Jason appeared to have suffered any serious physical injuries. They found themselves very fortunate that they had escaped unharmed, or at least they thought they had. But as the initial shock wore off, Michelle began to feel that something was wrong. She was concerned about her baby, so she immediately went to the hospital for an exam. It was there that Michelle and Jason received the devastating news. The pregnancy was not progressing. The baby wasn't growing. And essentially, they had lost the baby. What started as a joyful visit to share this pregnancy news turned into them grieving the loss of it. That excitement of their growing family was replaced with heartache, and they were trying to come to terms with their new reality. This loss was devastating for Michelle. She wanted this baby so badly. She wanted what it meant for their marriage. So she pushed through, eager to try again as soon as she could. Once Michelle was medically cleared, she and Jason began trying for another baby, and within just a few months, Michelle received the news that she had hoped for, a positive pregnancy test. But despite their shared desire to grow their family, Michelle was unsure again how Jason would react. To share the news in a special way, Michelle dressed Cassidy in a shirt that read, "I'm the big sister," to surprise Jason when he came home from work. I'd say that Jason had mixed feelings. He wasn't upset like he was the first time Michelle announced her pregnancy with Cassidy, but he wasn't as excited as she thought he would be. He was still very happy, but he seemed really stressed out. Michelle knew they were both still dealing with the grief over their lost child and the fear that something would go wrong again, so it made sense that Jason may not have been too excited. Plus, he had been under a lot more stress recently because he started a new job as a traveling sales rep for a medical records software company. His new job had come with enough of a raise that Michelle had actually been able to drop down to part-time hours so she could spend more time with Cassidy and their new baby when they arrived. Jason's excitement only grew as he attended every doctor's appointment with Michelle, eager to learn the gender of their second child. That day finally came when the ultrasound technician confirmed that they were expecting a baby boy. Jason was overjoyed. They actually chose a name for their son, Rylan. He was going to be the perfect addition to their family. However, despite their shared happiness about the pregnancy, cracks in their marriage began to deepen. Michelle returned to work quickly after Cassidy was born, but this time, she was determined not to make that same mistake, and she saw it as a mistake because she felt she missed out on so many of Cassidy's milestones. She wanted to be present for her son's early years. So after negotiating with her boss, Michelle struck that deal to work part-time, just 3 days a week, 10 hours a day, so she could spend more time at home with Cassidy and their future son, Rylan. As she prepared for Rylan's arrival, Michelle envisioned her mom, Linda, actually moving into the Raleigh home to help care for the children, especially because Linda was retiring from teaching. But you already know how Jason feels about Linda. For Michelle, having her mom around would provide the support that she really needed, both emotionally and practically. Plus, they had a third floor of their home with enough room to create a separate living space for Linda. They could even build a bathroom up there. Well, Jason was strongly in opposition to this arrangement. He felt like she was always undermining his role as a father and a husband. The thought of Linda moving in full-time filled Jason with dread. He refused to even consider it. He had been there, done that, and it wasn't good. This disagreement about Linda's involvement placed even more strain on their already fragile marriage. Both Michelle and Jason recognized that their relationship was in trouble, but Jason was reluctant to speak to a professional because they had tried therapy once before and it didn't go well because neither one of them could agree on the counselor that both of them liked. So instead, they turned to Michelle's sister, Meredith. She was studying to become a counselor at the time with a specialization in marriage and family dynamics. Meredith had gotten close to Jason when she was Cassidy's nanny. She got to see both sides of the situation. She witnessed the petty disagreements, the silent treatments that would ensue, and she agreed to mediate their discussions, even though she knew that they would probably need professional intervention. And this was because she was an interested party. I think it would be very hard not to be biased in the situation, but at least it was a starting point. Maybe they could just get to the bottom of why both of them felt and acted the way that they did towards one another. And during these sessions with Meredith, the long simmering frustrations came to light. You know, those ones where the little things, they just keep adding up over time and they become bigger and bigger. It was like that. First, Michelle expressed her deep dissatisfaction with Jason's lack of responsibility when it came to things around the house. She felt like she had to pick up the slack all of the time. And she really wished he would just be more active in helping with the household tasks and in understanding her emotional needs as well, because Michelle often felt like Jason wouldn't make the same compromises. For example, they were both huge North Carolina State Wolfpack college football fans. And as I mentioned, they had lifetime passes, which included specific seats in the stadium for the games. Before Cassidy came along, the couple enjoyed tailgating together with their friends for every single game. But now, Michelle would be the one that had to hang back and take care of Cassidy. Jason still went by himself, and she didn't really think that was fair. If they couldn't find a babysitter, Jason wouldn't choose to stay home. So it was like Michelle really never got the chance to kick back and have fun with her friends at a game. And this bothered her. And for Jason, his major issue, why they would fight so much, was in his perspective, their diminishing sex life. That was the problem he felt couldn't be ignored. It's not uncommon for a lot of new parents to go through a period of time when sex takes a back seat to the new baby. With the diaper duties, the sleepless nights, the feedings around the clock, it's kind of hard to work in together time. But it's also a valid concern. Additionally, Jason's resentment over Michelle's constant calls to her mom whenever they had a fight surfaced once again. He felt that it undermined his ability to resolve their conflicts privately, making it harder for them to strengthen their relationship. Again, another valid point. Both of them had their concerns, and this was a chance for them to lay it out on the table in a safe place. At times, Jason even admitted to feeling overwhelmed and even considered giving up in the marriage altogether. Remember, he had been a party boy before this, but he was genuinely trying to give it his best shot. But it was a lot all at once. When it came down to it, he said that he couldn't bear the thought of a divorce. The idea of being separated from Michelle would be more difficult than the challenges they were facing together. So despite the mounting tension, both Michelle and Jason seemed to be committed to finding a solution, even as their relationship was being pushed to its limits. They wanted this marriage to work. But Meredith described the way they would argue. It was like teenagers would, slamming doors and never being able to resolve their issues. They were trying to work it out, but it just didn't seem like things were working for the couple. So through her job at Progress Energy, Michelle was allowed to do counseling sessions, and she started doing them with Kimball Jane Sargent. This was a nurse psychotherapist, and Michelle finally opened up about a deeply troubling thing from her past. During her college years, Michelle had actually been violated, and the scars of that event were lingering. She confided in Kimball that even though she was now married to Jason, she didn't feel secure in their intimate relationship because of the panic and fear she'd experienced during that violation in college. It kept resurfacing when she was having intercourse with Jason. So to Michelle, what should have been an expression of love with her husband felt like an invasion, like he was forcing himself on her, even though he wasn't. So despite these intense emotional struggles, Michelle was clear about one thing. She didn't want a divorce. Her priority was ensuring that Cassidy and her unborn son had a stable and complete family. Keeping her family together mattered more than any of the cracks in the marriage. So essentially, even though she wasn't 100% happy, she was going through the motions and going with the flow, make things work out for the sake of her family. Michelle was still trying to find joy in other parts of her life. She had an exciting plan on the horizon, including a much-anticipated trip to Disney World to celebrate her mother's retirement. At the end of that week, she would be joined by her sorority sisters for a spa weekend in honor of their upcoming 30th birthdays. This would be a brief glimmer of happiness in an uncertain home life. Tuesday, October 10th, 2006, marked Michelle and Jason's third wedding anniversary, but that day passed without celebration. And that's because Jason's new job required him to travel all the time, and he was away on back-to-back business trips, first in Orlando and then in Denver. He had managed to at least give Michelle an anniversary card with a $25 gift card to Starbucks inside. But honestly, this left her feeling very disappointed. She hoped for something more meaningful, a gesture that would acknowledge the importance of their relationship. When Jason finally returned home, they made plans to celebrate their belated anniversary with dinner at Bella Monica, their favorite Italian restaurant. Michelle's mother, Linda, who was visiting at the time, offered to watch Cassidy for that evening. The day of the dinner, Linda drove Michelle to work, and then Jason picked her up afterwards. However, what should have been a romantic reunion quickly went downhill. Jason, who hadn't seen his pregnant wife in nearly a week, spent the entire 15-minute drive to the restaurant on a call. Yes, a business call. He ignored Michelle completely. And when he finally hung up, an argument erupted not only over their anniversary, but their upcoming plans for attending their friend Ryan and Shelley's wedding that weekend. They had gone to college with the couple. Michelle actually lived with Shelley, and he had lived with Ryan. Michelle wanted this weekend to be a romantic getaway for them, especially with their strained anniversary. But Jason had other plans. He explained that he would be spending the entire time with the guys, that they were going to have a guys' weekend with all of his college friends. And then he informed Michelle that he was actually going to be driving to the wedding with the guys and that she would be traveling separately with their wives. Jason claimed one of the wives had already gone over all this with her, but Michelle denied ever receiving such a call. Michelle was a planner. Jason wasn't. He was known to wait to the very last minute to decide to do something, and it usually had something to do with fun over being something practical. Well, this accusation that Michelle was lying or didn't know already quickly escalated into a full-blown fight, with Jason calling her selfish. By the end of their argument, Jason reluctantly agreed to drive to the wedding with Michelle and not his friends. But it was clear by his mood that he wasn't happy. His behavior that weekend only added to the tension. During the bachelor party, Jason drank in excess, and he ended up urinating all over himself in a dare. He was dared to pee his pants. So then he ended up having to borrow clothes from the groom. This wasn't a new occurrence. At parties, he would be known for these type of antics. And that night, he peed all over Ryan's carpet. Ryan ended up putting him in the shower, only for him to run out completely nude in front of everyone, including other wives, other women, and exposing himself. It was embarrassing for Michelle. And this kind of reckless behavior had become typical of Jason during any of their nights out, leaving Michelle feeling isolated and frustrated. Throughout the rehearsal dinner, she sat all alone, while Jason spent that evening with his friends, barely acknowledging her presence. When they got home after that weekend, things reached a boiling point. What began as a verbal argument escalated, and Michelle later told her sister that during their fight, Jason threw a remote control at her. So the cracks in their marriage were no longer subtle. They had become deep holes that threatened to engulf everything they built together. It seemed like it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Several days after that tense wedding weekend, on November 2nd, 2006, Jason was preparing for yet another business trip, and Michelle was close to her 6th month of pregnancy at the time. Jason's frequent business trips left Michelle at home alone with Cassidy carrying the weight of their household, and Michelle tried to convince herself that Jason wasn't being selfish. He was just trying to make a good impression in his new job and to ensure that they were financially stable before their second child arrived. This time, Jason told her he had a sales trip to attend in Clintwood, Virginia, early on the morning of Friday the 3rd of November. Clintwood was more than 300 miles away from their home, which meant a very long and exhausting drive. There was no way that Jason was going to drive there all in the same day. So to break up the trip, he booked a hotel in Hillsville, which was roughly halfway between their home and Clintwood. Jason told Michelle he was going to attend his sales meeting on Friday morning and then visit his parents in Brevard before driving home in time for the weekend. In the early evening of Thursday, the 2nd of November, he packed up his Ford Explorer outside their home on Birchleaf Drive, preparing to leave Raleigh. Before he left, he kissed Michelle and Cassidy goodbye before heading off into the dusk that evening. It was a routine goodbye, but this time, Michelle's best friend Shelley was also there. I mentioned Shelley already. She was the bride in the wedding that they attended the weekend before. She'd actually made plans to come over to watch Grey's Anatomy with Michelle because her husband was also going to be out of town. So the girls decided to get together that night. She was also there to retrieve her husband's clothing, the ones that Jason had to borrow during his drunken mishap at the bachelor party. Once Jason left, the girls had dinner together, and after the meal, they put Cassidy to bed in Michelle and Jason's bed. The two friends then settled in front of the TV. Michelle was excited. She shared the news about the nursery theme that she chose for baby Rylan, and then they chatted about life. After a while, the conversation came around to Michelle's marriage, and Michelle shared that she and Jason were arguing more than ever. He was making all of these sales trips, which left her feeling like a single mom. And her sister Meredith, even though she was living close by, she was busy getting her master's degree, so she couldn't play an active role as Cassidy's nanny. As they were watching the show together, an uneasy feeling began to creep over Shelley. She actually asked Michelle if she ever felt scared to be here alone. As they sat together in that cozy living room, Shelley couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Throughout their time living on Birchleaf Drive, Michelle and Jason had occasionally heard some strange noises outside their home, footsteps rustling in the bushes, but they would dismiss these as ordinary sounds of their neighborhood, which was surrounded by a lot of empty wooded areas, with homes being spread apart. Yet that night, something felt different. There was an eerie feeling that intensified for Shelley. She kept glancing nervously toward the window. There were no window coverings on the windows and the doors that led out to the backyard. And Michelle explained that there was something that was kind of unsettling about the house. It was its proximity to a trailer park behind them. It was only 400 feet away from their backyard. With the cold November air outside and the bare trees, it made the trailer park feel uncomfortably close. That anxiety resurfaced, especially because Jason was far away. But at least he was keeping in touch by calling over the course of that evening. Jason called Michelle about 7 times just to check in. But thoroughly spooked and unable to shake this ominous feeling, Shelley decided to leave earlier than she had planned. Shelley felt so uncomfortable about the way that the house felt that night that as soon as Michelle walked her to her car, she quickly called her husband and she talked to him the entire drive home. It was just an eerie feeling. By the time Shelley left, it was around 10:30, and then Michelle went upstairs to get in bed and go to sleep. The next day, on Friday, November 3rd, 2006, Michelle would be expected at work after dropping Cassidy off at daycare and then return home in the evening. Meredith, on the other hand, was typically off work on Fridays, and she would sleep in for a bit. Around noon, she woke up to her cell phone ringing, but she wasn't fast enough to answer it in time, so it went to voicemail. It was Jason, and he was calling with a request. For context, about a week prior, Meredith and Jason had a discussion about Jason getting Michelle a nicer anniversary gift to kind of make up for that lame Starbucks gift card. And Meredith mentioned that traditionally you gift your partner something leather for your 3rd year anniversary. If you've never heard this before, the first year you gift them something paper, the second year is cotton, the third is leather, 4 is fruit, so on and so forth. So Meredith mentioned to Jason that he should get her a nice designer handbag because recently Meredith had gotten one and it didn't fit right, so she gave it to her sister, Michelle, and she really liked it. So taking this tip into consideration, Jason was calling Meredith that morning because he needed a huge favor. It was the day after he left for his business trip, and he had been searching online for a Coach handbag on eBay. He wanted to get it as a surprise gift for Michelle. Surprises were a big deal to her. So his voice message mentioned that he had printed out auction details for all these different listings, but he forgot it on the printer in the home office. And now he was so stressed out because he didn't want Michelle to go in the office and find it. He wanted to keep it a surprise. So he was wondering if Meredith could just swing by the house before Michelle came home from work and grab those papers from the printer in their upstairs home office. And even though Meredith didn't usually come over in the middle of the day like that, she was supposed to meet her sister and Cassidy later that day anyway, and it wasn't a problem if she dropped by unannounced. Plus, she knew that Jason and Michelle were really trying to make the effort to rebuild their marriage, and Michelle asked Jason to be more romantic. So here was Meredith thinking, you know what? The least she could do was help. She didn't even shower. She just left because she figured she would be right back. She headed over to her sister's home at 5108 Birchleaf Drive in the Enchanted Oaks subdivision. And on the way there, Meredith and her mom talked on the phone, but they hung up as soon as Meredith arrived around 1 p.m. Before even getting to the driveway, Meredith was already struck by something that seemed kind of odd. At the end of the driveway, there were lampposts, and these lamps were on. Michelle would typically turn them off when she headed to bed, or at the latest when she left the next morning when she was getting ready for work. So it was something that stood out to her sister, and she thought that it was really weird that the lights were on. She wondered why. Then she proceeded to drive down the long driveway up towards the house and parked in front of the garage door. That's when she noticed the next unsettling anomaly. The gate to the backyard was wide open. The family's black lab, Mr. Garrison, often spent time outside in the yard, and Michelle was always careful to keep that gate closed. So that seemed really out of the ordinary. Now, once Meredith got out of the car, she closed the gate and then she headed to the front door. But unfortunately, it was at that time that she realized, as she left in such a rush, she forgot to bring Michelle's spare house key to get in. So she proceeded to the back door of the house, but it was locked. And when she was over there, she heard something that sounded like running water, like a hose was lightly running, but she didn't stop to inspect it at the time. She could also hear the faint sound of the dog howling, but she couldn't see the dog anywhere. He hardly barked, so that too seemed a bit strange. At that point, she remembered that the garage door was actually broken. It could easily be picked up from the bottom and it would just roll up without the remote. So she figured she would give it a try, and sure enough, she was able to get inside the garage. That's when she had an increasingly uneasy feeling because Michelle's Lexus SUV was parked in the garage, a sign that Michelle was still at home, even though she should have been at work, so that was odd. Meredith entered the house through the mudroom door and proceeded into the kitchen area where she put her keys on the counter. That's when she saw the purse she had gifted to her sister on the floor. Now, she knew at this point that Michelle had to be home because she wouldn't have left her purse there without being there. So she called out her name a few times saying, "Michelle, Michelle," but she got no response. So she made her way to the main staircase where the front door is located. There were 2 staircases in this house. One was by the mudroom door that led up to the den area, and there was another staircase in the main portion of the house that led up to the bedrooms and the office where she was headed. Slowly, she began climbing the stairs to the second floor, calling for Michelle once again. As she neared the top, something strange caught her eye. In front of the stairs was a bathroom that Cassidy would usually use, and Meredith noticed the door and carpet were dotted with dark red stains and what looked like tiny footprints. At first, Meredith thought that Cassidy had gotten into Michelle's red hair dye and made a mess. Maybe that's why Michelle hadn't gone to work yet. But when she entered Michelle's bedroom, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. There she was, face down, next to the bed. The walls, the white satin comforter, the pillows, and the bedding on Michelle's side of the bed were covered in what now appeared to be blood. But in Meredith's mind, she thought it must be a practical joke. Halloween had just been days before this. It couldn't be real. This couldn't be her. Meredith's brain wasn't processing what she was seeing, but then she began to panic. The stains were not streaks of dye. They covered the room, even reaching up to the ceiling. It was then that Meredith realized the horrifying truth, that the red stains weren't hair dye, they were blood. She ran to the right side of the bed to grab the cordless phone to call 911, and as she was just about to dial the 9, her eyes darted toward the bed. It was Cassidy. She had been cowering underneath the covers for who knows how long, while the body of her mother lay inches away. Cassidy was clearly confused and traumatized by what was going on around her. She had jumped up from underneath the covers and was now staring straight at her aunt. Then she climbed from the bed and hopped into Meredith's arms and tightly hugged her. Meredith then proceeded to call 911. I have this phone call in its entirety. Keep in mind, this is going to be heartbreaking. It was hard for me to listen to, especially with 2.5-year-old little Cassidy, her little voice in the background. But I do think it's important for you to hear exactly what Meredith relayed to the dispatcher. So here we go.
Location emergency?
I need an ambulance. It's an emergency.
What address are you at, ma'am?
Virtually 5108 Birchleaf Road. Oh my God.
All right, what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened.
I think my sister's dead.
Okay, tell me what happened, ma'am.
I have no idea. Oh my God.
All right, stay on the phone with me, please. What's your name?
Meredith Fisher.
Meredith.
And this is the young address. Oh my God.
Meredith, listen to me, please.
Yeah.
Are you with the patient now?
Yeah, but then her daughter.
Okay, how old is the patient?
And there's blood everywhere. She's 28, 29.
28.
Should I try to move her?
Listen to me, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what to do.
Okay.
But you need to calm down so we can help her. You said there's blood everywhere?
Yes.
All right, is she conscious?
No, I don't think so. Should I try to help her?
Listen to me, ma'am.
I'm listening.
Is she breathing?
I don't think so.
Have you checked?
Michelle? She's cold.
Okay. Listen to me. Did you see what happened?
I don't know. Kathy, come here, sweetie. I'm here with her daughter.
Okay.
There's like blood footprints all over the house. My daughter, like her daughter's little footprints.
Okay, listen to me. What's your first name?
Meredith?
All right, Meredith.
Yes, sir.
Did you see what happened?
I just came here on a fluke. I usually, don't come here during the day.
Okay.
She shouldn't be home. She should be at work.
Okay, listen to me.
Yes, sir. I'm
Did you say?
right now.
Can you tell me why she looks like she's dead?
I don't know. I have no idea. There's blood all over the
Did you say she's cold?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, stay on the phone.
Okay. Yes, baby. Did you know what happened to Mommy? Did she fall?
Do you think she's beyond any help?
I don't know, honestly.
You don't know? All right.
I'm normally very good under
Okay.
pressure.
We're going to tell you what to do then, okay?
Yes, sir.
Are you right by her now?
I'm keeping her daughter out of there.
All right, so you're not with her?
I'm right outside the
All
bedroom.
right. Can you get her daughter secured? Can you carry the phone into where she's at?
Yes.
All right. Can you secure her daughter?
Kathy, sweetie, can you stay in your room for 2 seconds, okay? Okay. Okay. Can you close the door for 2 seconds? I'll be right back in, okay, sweetie? Oh. Okay.
You ready?
Okay, yes, sir.
Okay. You got a cordless phone?
Yeah.
All right.
Stay right there, sweetie. Okay.
All right. Is she laying on her back?
No, she's laying on her stomach.
She's on her stomach. She's face down?
Yes.
All right. Can you get her on her back?
Okay. Oh, my God. No. I don't think so. She's so heavy.
I said you can get her on her back.
I don't really think she's bad.
Pardon?
I really think she's bad.
Okay. Are you certain?
Hang on, Kathy, sweetie, can you go in your room? Can you hear me? I'm pretty sure.
You are?
No, I don't know.
Okay, we need to make sure.
Okay.
Can you get her on her back for me?
She's kind of twisted in a way that I can't do that.
You can't roll her over?
Not easily.
Are you going to have to try?
Hang on, I'm trying to see if I can get her pulse.
We got to try to do CPR if we can get her on the back there.
So she's like cold.
She's cold? Okay. All right.
Her body is stiff.
Okay. Then don't try. If she's cold, tell me.
Oh my God,
Probably nothing much you can do.
Should I not touch anything?
All right. Try not to touch anything more than you did. Was anything out of place or unusual when you came in?
This place does not look like what it normally looks like.
Okay. What?
There's blood in the bed.
Okay. All right. Try not to touch anything else,
Okay,
okay?
I just moved the pillow.
All right. Just leave everything exactly where it is now.
Okay.
Do
Okay.
you see anything else?
Um,
Do you see anything else that looks unusual?
no. Kelsey, was anybody here? The dog was freaking out when I got here. Was anybody here, sweetie?
All right. Meredith?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm gonna get the sheriff's department to pick up on the line with us.
Okay.
Because they're going to need to talk to you about what you're seeing, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to brief them on what's happened, and you just stay on the line. What's your last name, Meredith?
Sister? Her last name is Young.
Are you her relative?
I'm her only sister.
Okay. All right, Meredith. Stay with me just a minute, okay?
Okay.
Sheriff's office, where's your emergency? Hey, this is Brent. Uh-huh. Look, I've got a lady named Meredith Fisher on the line for this address. Okay. We got EMS en route to Birchleigh. Okay. And she's in there with her sister. She's going to tell you about what she's seen. The parent side might be at code 7, and there's evidence of trauma. We got deputies already en route. Okay, you want to talk to her? I'm going to let her talk to you. I will, thanks. She don't mind me. Okay. Meredith, go ahead. Meredith?
I'm also here with her 2.5-year-old, so it's kind of difficult for me to pay attention.
Okay.
Okay.
Where are you at now, though, Meredith? You on Birchleigh?
Downstairs, I'm at 5108 Birchleigh.
Okay.
I typically handle myself very well under pressure, but I don't know what to do.
Okay. And now, is rescue there yet?
No.
Okay.
I go outside to wait for them so they
Now, what have you found when you walked in the house?
I don't know, I almost thought it was a practical joke. There's just blood everywhere.
Okay. And who lives there, and are they there?
Okay, it's my sister's house,
Uh-huh.
and she has a husband that travels quite a bit. That I spoke with him last night. He's out of town. He's on his way to his parents' house. And her daughter that's still in pajamas.
Okay.
That, like, normally my sister goes to work early and takes her to daycare, you know, like, said something's not right. And when I first came to the house...
Could you hold on 1 second for me a minute?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you out of the Birchleigh?
I'm sorry?
Are you out on Birchleigh?
Birchleigh, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, what I need you to do, if possible, who else is there with you? I can hear a child.
Yeah.
Okay. EMS, and I got the deputies around. What I need you to go ahead and do is just walk outside.
Okay.
Because we don't know what's going on yet. Just have everybody walk outside. Stand up.
Let's take a ride, okay? Come on, Garrison. Let's go, buddy. We're going to go outside. We wait for a nice peaceful
If you want to go ahead go up to your car and sit in your car. And that way, till we figure out what's going on, okay?
Okay, I don't know what I did with my keys. I can't even think. Come No, we're just wait outside for a nice pizza. I'll just get a cup of pasta, okay, sweetie?
Who's this person to you?
This is my niece that I'm holding right now.
No, I mean the person in the house. Your sister. Oh my God.
Yes, sweetie, that's my car. I'm trying.
Yeah, this as best as you can. I know it's difficult. With it.
My niece is very smart for her age. She's 2.5, but I think she's saying that there was somebody in the house. I don't really understand because I know she doesn't understand.
How old is your sister?
My sister's 29.
29. Do you have any problems
What?
that you know of? Do you have any personal problems that you know of?
Not really. You know, like her and her husband fight a little bit, but nothing too ridiculous. She's pregnant. I know that. She's about 4.5 months pregnant.
Try to keep calm.
Okay.
Okay?
Try.
Wait, different channel.
There's a fire department truck here.
Okay.
I don't know why,
But yeah, they respond as well because they call.
I'm trying.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. I can't even believe that this is real. Like, the two of them play jokes on each other, like, my sister and her husband, that, like, I almost thought it was a joke. That's how over the top it just seems in there. Something's not right.
The fire department's going to talk to you now. Okay. They'll probably go in the house to check on her, okay?
Okay, thank you.
That call is so sad. That poor little girl and this poor family. It's too much to bear. Plus, it appeared that Cassidy might have been in the bedroom when Michelle had been killed and had walked through her mother's blood, covered in it, as she made her way to the bathroom. That's what all those little footprints were. During this 911 call, Meredith was trying to get Cassidy to remain in her bedroom as she attempted to do as the dispatcher instructed her to, but Cassidy didn't want to be there. Cassidy was too worried about her mommy to stay put. Instead, she kept trying to lead her aunt into the bathroom, saying that she needed to get a washcloth for mommy. Cassidy asked Meredith for Band-Aids because she said that mommy has boo-boos everywhere and she needs a washcloth, and that was so sad. I could hardly hold back tears the first time I heard her say that. Meredith tried to hold it together so she could explain what was going on to the dispatcher, and eventually she was asked to roll Michelle's body over and do CPR. But she couldn't. Her body was cold and stiff. Meredith couldn't believe this was happening. You can even tell that by her voice, and she even says it at one point that she cannot believe that this is happening. Anyone that's been through a traumatic event knows that sometimes time can stand still. EMS was sent out, and Meredith and Cassidy were placed inside the back of a fire truck. Meredith decided to, at that point, call her mother, Linda. She had just gotten off the phone with her before she was confronted with this horrific scene. And Meredith had to spell it out for her mother, since she didn't want Cassidy to understand what she was going to say. She told her mom that Michelle was DEAD. Linda responded with, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And Meredith just told her to get there as soon as possible. And I don't know if you caught it, but at one point in this telephone call, Meredith told the dispatcher that her niece was advanced for her age, and that she thought, from what she heard the little girl saying, that maybe Cassidy had saw someone that night in the house, but she couldn't really understand baby talk. It seemed like it took forever, but before long, there was a ton of officers scouring the young residence. Cassidy was examined, and they confirmed that she was not physically injured. Now it was time to go inside the house and examine the scene. Crime scene investigators from the Raleigh-Wake County Police Department arrived, ready to piece together the tragic events that unfolded inside that home. By the front door hung a ghost decoration left over from Halloween. It was swinging in the wind. No decoration, though, would be a match for the true horror of what waited inside. Sheriff's Deputy Scott Arp was one of the first on the scene, and Sergeant Richard Spivey was leading this investigation. From the outset, there was no sign of forced entry, which raised immediate questions about how the assailant had entered the home. But as we know, the garage door had been broken, so that could have been the way they made entry. They did dust for prints on the frame of the mudroom door, just in case, especially because they found blood on that doorknob. It was swabbed for analysis. They found the first floor relatively undisturbed. The kitchen looked lived in, but nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. I did find it sad that Michelle's ultrasound photos could be seen on the kitchen counter, and there was another one on display on the refrigerator. Michelle's purse was in the kitchen as well, and even though it was laying on the ground on its side, Meredith let them know that it was upright when she arrived, and it wasn't unusual for Michelle to drop those bags where they were. That was not part of a struggle. The living room looked normal. A hamper full of clothing was in the middle of the room, a child's book was on the coffee table, and family photos covered the fireplace mantel. None of the blinds in that room that looked towards the trailer park were open, but there was that glass door to the backyard area that did look straight outside, and nothing was obstructing the view. It was the second floor of the home, however, where most of the disturbing evidence was found. At the top of the stairs, tiny bloody footprints belonging to 2-year-old Cassidy were scattered across the landing, leading from her mom and dad's bedroom into both her bedroom and the bathroom next door. But they were more concentrated in the bathroom. Blood was found on a small step stool in front of the sink. A bright green rug on the floor of the bathroom, and one of Cassidy's bloody socks was lying nearby. A yellow hooded towel, also stained with blood, was discovered in the bathroom, but there were no traces of blood in the toilet, tub, or the sink. It was clear that at some point little Cassidy had left the bedroom and washed her hands, only to return later and hide underneath the bedsheets. Michelle's blood was also found smeared on the walls in the bathroom at the same height that Cassidy would have been able to reach. The investigators paused when they saw this part of the scene. Aside from being professionals, they are still human with families of their own, and seeing those tiny footprints, it was a very emotional moment. They hadn't seen anything like that before. Since Cassidy was physically unharmed, they knew that this was her mother's blood. She had been drenched in it. But what was interesting is that Deputy Arp noticed she was wearing a clean set of pink pajamas when Meredith was holding her outside. So we asked her, "Did you clean the child?" And Meredith said no. So even though Cassidy had a little bit of blood on the soles of her feet and underneath her toenails, there was only a couple small spots of blood on the bottom of her pajamas. So Cassidy, who might have been able to clean her hands, was not capable of cleaning her whole body. She wouldn't have been able to change out of her bloody pajamas, which were nowhere to be found at that time, and crawl back under the sheets without getting more blood on her. This meant that someone must have changed her between the time Michelle was murdered and when Meredith found her. Remember that detail. In the bedroom, Michelle's body was found lying face down on the floor. Her head was pressed against the open closet door. A thick pool of blood formed under her head. Her legs were still kind of upright and tangled in the covers, as though she had kind of slid down the bed and ended up hanging off the side of it. She was dressed in black sweatpants and a white zip-up hoodie with red and pink stripes around the bottom. After moving Michelle's body and closing the closet door, investigators noted blood spatter on the front of the door. This indicated that Michelle had been beaten while the door was shut and that her body had been moved to open it. The investigators believed that Michelle had been attacked while she was lying in bed, probably asleep. A pillow from her side of the bed was soaked in blood and had fallen to the floor. There was a large blood stain where Michelle had been lying in bed, and large blood droplets, and then smaller cast-off spray was across the wall near the door. There was actually a hole in the wall that was fresh, and it was about a foot above the closet door and stained with blood. This indicated where a violent impact had taken place, and below this hole, more blood pooled along the baseboard and the doorway, with spatter visible between the gouge mark and the floor. This entire room was in disarray. You could tell a struggle had happened. There were decorative pillows from the bed scattered across the floor, and among them, a white triangle pillow next to the floorboard near Michelle's side of the bed caught the investigators' attention. 2 distinct adult-sized bloody shoe prints were found on this pillow. Then a partial shoe print was found on a blanket inside the bedroom as well. These were collected and sent to the crime lab for analysis. On the floor of Jason's closet, the investigators found more of Cassidy's bloody footprints alongside one of her tiny baby dolls lying just inches away from her mother's body. Tragically, it was determined that little Cassidy had put the doll next to her mother to comfort her, just as her mom would have done for her countless times in her short life. That made me so sad. She took the little baby doll and she was putting it near her mom. Further adding to the mystery, though, was the discovery that 2 out of the 3 drawers in Michelle's wooden jewelry box on her dresser were missing. Her engagement ring and her wedding band were nowhere to be found. And despite a thorough search of the home, they remained missing. In the primary bathroom, investigators used phthalate. This is a chemical that's used to detect traces of blood that were invisible to the naked eye under an alternate light source. This is sort of like luminol. And surprisingly, no blood was found in the primary bathroom. As they continued their search, investigators found those eBay printouts that Jason had asked Meredith to retrieve in the second-floor office, which were collected as evidence. Outside, another detail emerged. A garden hose was laying in the middle of the concrete path near the back deck, with the water trickling from the nozzle. This was a noise that Meredith heard when she ventured into the backyard upon arrival. The detectives suspected that the hose may have been used by the assailant to clean off blood after the attack. However, there was no blood visible on the hose, the deck, or the path. The only other clue outside was a tire mark in the dirt near the end of the driveway. Despite an exhaustive search of the home, the exterior of the property, and even the surrounding neighborhood, investigators were not able to locate a potential murder weapon. The mystery of who had committed this violent crime, how they entered the home and exited without leaving more evidence, and what they used to harm Michelle only deepened as they tried to piece together the horrifying scene. Birchleaf Drive was once a very quiet and safe area, and the house had been filled with love, plans, and a growing family. But now it was a scene of an unimaginable tragedy. Once the initial scene investigation was complete, Michelle's body was removed and transported for autopsy. When Meredith had found her, her body was already discolored, cold, and stiff, indicating that she had been dead for several hours. Meanwhile, while all this had been going on in the afternoon of November 3rd, and tragedy was unfolding back in Raleigh, Jason was far from home. He had spent the day at a business meeting at Dickerson County Hospital in Clinwood. Unfortunately, the meeting didn't go as planned. Jason left without making a sale. Feeling frustrated as he drove towards his mother's home in Brevard, Jason tried calling Michelle on both her office and her cell phone, but there was no answer. His thoughts also turned to that favor he asked of Meredith to retrieve those eBay printouts of the Coach bag at the house. When Jason arrived at his mother's home, something felt off. His mother, Pat, and stepdad were standing outside. They were visibly upset and concerned, and Jason asked if something happened to his grandma. They shook their heads. That's when they informed him it wasn't his grandmother, it was Michelle. She was dead. Minutes later, Meredith called him and told him that not only was Michelle dead, she had been murdered. The devastating news brought Jason to his knees. He began sobbing uncontrollably in the front yard, overcome with grief. Shortly thereafter, Jason's sister Heather and her husband arrived, finding Jason inside wrapped in a blanket. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. There was tissues scattered around him. Heather embraced her brother, and they cried together. Then he said, "I not only lost my wife, I lost my son." And Heather told him that Michelle was up in heaven with their sweet little boy Rylan and their father. And in response, Jason looked over at Heather and muttered, "You're going to make a good mom for Cassidy." This was a chilling acknowledgement of their future without Michelle. Because when Cassidy was born, Heather had been named as Cassidy's guardian in case anything were to happen to Jason or Michelle, but no one thought that this would actually happen. Soon after Heather arrived, the family began the drive from Brevard back to Raleigh. Jason was just laying in the back seat with his head resting on his mother's lap for the entire drive. While the weight of the loss of Michelle hung heavy over the car, Jason didn't speak much about Michelle, their unborn child, or Cassidy. Instead, his focus shifted to the future. He was worried. He was worried about not having Michelle's income. He worried about losing the home that he was living in. And he confided in his mother that he couldn't afford the mortgage on his own. The looming financial burden added another layer to this shock and despair. Back in New York, when Michelle's mother, Linda, received the heartbreaking call from Meredith, she wasted no time arranging a flight to North Carolina. The loss of her daughter was incomprehensible, and she needed to be there for her family. I'm sure nothing made sense at this point, and there was going to be a long road ahead of them. As the family made arrangements for Michelle's funeral, her autopsy was being conducted. The examination revealed the brutality of her final moments. Her body was covered in scrapes and bruises, particularly from her forearms to her fingertips. Clear signs she had fought desperately to defend herself. The medical examiner noted over 20 blunt force injuries to the back of Michelle's head. Some of these injuries measured as long as 4 inches, and the force of the blows were so severe they exposed her skull. The pattern and shape of the wounds suggested that the murder weapon was likely a crescent-shaped, heavy, blunt object. The relentless blows fractured Michelle's skull in several places, causing extensive brain hemorrhaging. In addition to the injuries on the back of her head, Michelle also sustained a violent blow to the front of her face, splitting her mouth and knocking out her teeth. Altogether, she had been struck at least 30 times. The sheer force of the attack caused her jaw to break through the skin. As the medical examiner looked at Michelle's neck, further disturbing details came to light. Significant internal hemorrhaging indicated that Michelle had been strangled during this attack. There were presence of fingernail marks on her neck, which suggested that she had actually tried to pry the assailant's hands away from her in a desperate attempt to survive. Despite the overwhelming violence of this attack, the autopsy found no evidence of sexual violation. Michelle's cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to her head, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. Though the exact time of Michelle's death could not be pinpointed, the medical examiner estimated that she'd been killed several hours before her sister Meredith discovered her body at 1:15 p.m. on November 3rd. The medical examiner's report had painted a picture of a violent and brutal attack, which would have lasted several minutes before Michelle died. It was a slow and painful death, potentially while her young daughter watched. How horrifying. That poor little girl. At the same time, as word was spreading about Michelle's murder, detectives were focusing on who would have a reason to kill her and why. The first person they wanted to talk to was Jason, her husband. And we know by now that most murders are committed by someone the victim knows, and women in particular are disproportionately killed by their intimate partners. Statistics consistently show that a significant percentage of female homicide victims are killed by a current or a former partner. But what's not talked about as much is the significance of strangulation in how a person's murdered. In this case, Michelle was both strangled to death and beaten. When strangulation is used during the commission of a murder, it's often an indication of a deeply personal and intense level of violence. Strangulation requires a person to be very close to the victim. It's an intimate form of attack. It suggests that the killer wants to exercise complete control over the victim in their final moments, both physically and psychologically. This is often driven by intense emotions like rage or jealousy and demonstrate a desire to assert dominance or power over the victim. In many cases, the combination of strangulation and beating is also overkill, where the attacker's intent is not just to kill them, but to inflict a maximum amount of harm and suffering. Jason and his family arrived at Meredith's home in Raleigh, and the investigators were already waiting. They immediately confiscated Jason's Ford Explorer, all of his luggage, and anything else in the car, trying to see if there was any link between him to Michelle's murder. However, a thorough search of this vehicle and bags yielded no forensic evidence, no blood, no hair, or any physical clues that could tie him directly to this crime. Inside, investigators found various pieces of paper, including MapQuest directions printed from the home office computer before his trip to Clintwood, Virginia. Along with the directions, they uncovered 3 gas receipts and a checkout receipt from the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia. They also found a copy of USA Today with a hotel sticker on it, along with a road atlas open to a page showing highways between Virginia and North Carolina. Everything pointed to Jason not being involved, but they had to clear him to make sure, so they could move on to someone else and look in other directions. He was the last person to talk to Michelle the night she was killed, and he happened to be the reason why she was found, because remember, he asked Meredith to go to the house to retrieve that printout. Those receipts that they found in his Explorer gave them a direction to look in. After he left the house, he had stopped at a gas station at 7:30 p.m. before leaving Raleigh. CCTV footage confirmed this. Then 2 hours later, he was on more CCTV footage at a Cracker Barrel restaurant in Greensboro, North Carolina. Then he proceeded to the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia, and he's seen on the hotel surveillance camera at the front desk, checking in at 10:49 p.m. So doing the math, he went straight to where he was supposed to be in the time frame he should have been there. He was also seen at the front desk at midnight and had made a phone call around that same time that placed him in the Hillsville area. So this provided detectives with somewhat of a timeline to work with to rule him out or to look into him further. The next morning, he made another phone call from the Hillsville area around 7:40 a.m. before his sales meeting at Dickerson County Hospital in Clintwood, Virginia. So it seemed Jason was nowhere near the crime scene. But as more of Jason's family members were being interviewed, they sent him a warning, telling him that he probably needed to get a lawyer because the police were asking some disturbing questions, and it appeared that Jason was their prime suspect right away. Going back to when Meredith was on that 911 call, she was asked if there were any issues in Michelle's marriage. And of course she would know because she was helping them work them out. She said that they argued here and there, but it was nothing that would lead to something like this. But as everyone close to Michelle was interviewed, it became clear that Michelle and Jason's marriage was less than perfect, which I've already explained. But there was more. Some concerning aspects and other suspicions, and I'm going to start with the suspicious aspects. Remember that car crash on the way to Jason's parents' house? Well, his SUV had veered to the right, meaning towards the passenger side, where Michelle was sitting. If there hadn't been a witness, what would have happened? It started to look like Jason may have staged that crash to look like it was an accident. It's also when she was pregnant, just like this time. Was that a coincidence? Well, there's more. When they became new parents when Cassidy was born, Michelle and Jason took responsible steps to plan for their daughter's future. They had thoughtful discussions about what would happen in the event of their deaths. Even though this is not a fun conversation to have, it's an important one. And since Michelle was a CPA, financial security for their future was at the forefront of these conversations. Michelle was actually able to get a great rate on life insurance policies for their family. At this point, Michelle expressed a desire to have her sister Meredith named as Cassidy's guardian if anything were to happen to them. However, Jason had a different opinion. He wanted his sister Heather to take on the role. He argued that Heather was already married, she was in a better position to care for Cassidy in the unfortunate event that she was left parentless. He also believed that with Heather's work schedule, it gave her more flexibility. And though Michelle understood Jason's points, she suggested they revisit this conversation in 3 years, leaving the decision open-ended for the time being. But Jason shared with her that his family had such an impactful situation happen to them when they lost their father at an early age. It made him worry about Cassidy's future. He didn't want to wait. So Michelle gave in. She understood where Jason was coming from. His concerns were valid. They were grounded in his past experience and a desire to protect their family's future and safeguard their child from hardships. So this was interesting. Jason was the one that pushed for this life insurance policy, and he wanted one of his family members to be named as a beneficiary. Was it odd? Or was it just as they said, that he had lost his dad and he wanted to make sure that his own child was secure? Or was this a plan? Remember, he didn't want to be a husband, let alone a father. But then, all of a sudden, he had a change of heart. Was it because in his mind he thought, insurance policy? The couple actually opted for 2 $1 million policies, a decision that was largely influenced by the fact that Michelle was able to get that good rate because she was a CPA. Of course, at the time, she had reservations about the size of this policy. $2 million seemed like a large amount, but even though she was initially hesitant, she agreed because Jason persisted. Michelle's friend Fiona was the lawyer, and she was the one that drafted the agreement. And Michelle did confide in her that she was a little bit apprehensive at how large the policy was, but of course they went through with it. Michelle and Jason's friends both explained Jason's antics when intoxicated, and just as recently as a few weeks before the murder, that Jason and Michelle had been arguing so badly at Ryan and Shelley's wedding that they referred to it as World War III. Other friends, as well as Michelle's sister and mom, told investigators about the constant fights in regard to Jason not wanting Linda around. This was even documented in emails between Michelle and Jason as recent as October 4th. In an email from Jason to Michelle, he wrote in part, quote, "First and foremost, I want to apologize if you took what I was trying to say this morning in a way that seemed negative towards your mom. She's a very good person, and I know you care for her deeply, as you should. I just want you to realize that whether you see it or not, her involvement in our lives is a bit higher than I feel an ideal situation should be. I think this can be detrimental to you and I don't want to see that happen. I have told you this ever since she spent the first summer with us, and I'm once again telling you. Please listen this time, as I do not want to go down our path of troubles over our intimacy struggles. I do not feel you have been very fair about this entire situation. You continually try to spin this discussion and bring in side tangents that are completely irrelevant. I do understand what you're saying about your mother being alone for Thanksgiving, but that is not my fault or your fault or anyone else's fault. You have a tremendously large and close family, and she has multiple places she can go if she so chooses. She could, possibly should, think about her other daughter, even if it is for half a day. Should Meredith be alone on Thanksgiving? Your alone argument works that way too, right? Or is it the likely case that maybe your own sister gets tired of your mom after a given period of time? By the way, don't answer. I know what it is. The fact is, your mom simply wants to be with you and Cassidy, but she has got to start realizing that seeing us as often as she does creates an imbalance in our relationship, and I've told you that from the start. End quote. I also want to point out, in this email, he wrote, "Our marriage has seen better days, and I don't see it trending up." His words. This went on for like 2 more pages, but I think you get the idea. And Meredith came forward to add that Friday before Halloween on October 27th, she was over at their house and she did somewhat of a counseling session with them, and they talked for 4 or 5 hours. That is such a long time. And the main issue surrounded the holidays approaching, and Jason didn't want Linda staying there. Point blank, he didn't want it. He felt that a weekend was enough time with his mother-in-law. But the thing was, she didn't live nearby. She was flying in from New York. So to only get a few days there, it seemed ridiculous. She's family, and a big part of Michelle's family. They were really into Christmas and the holidays. They went all out, and Michelle couldn't think about rejecting her own mother. And why would she have to? And in that letter, the fact that he was saying like, no, your mom just wants to see you and the baby, and he was acting like that was a bad thing, that's confusing. He was making the point like she doesn't need to be here. She just wants to be here. But shouldn't she be able to be there? He sounds like a spoiled brat who's just throwing a temper tantrum because he's being scolded. Because Linda definitely put her foot down, and no one else probably did with him. This was an ongoing argument between the couple, and it was getting more and more intense as it was getting closer to Thanksgiving, with Christmas fast approaching thereafter. Meredith said the only other issue with Jason was that he wanted more sex. But Michelle wanted more romance. She wanted date nights and bonding. She didn't want them to just sleep together because it was convenient. She actually found it hard to sleep with Jason after they'd been fighting, or he'd given her the silent treatment for days. So neither one of them was getting their needs met. Well, sort of. And you're going to know why I'm saying that. Meredith said that the next night, on Saturday, October 28th, she was managing the Lucky 32 restaurant, and Michelle and Jason got a babysitter that night, and they came in for a date night, and Meredith was surprised to see them. When Michelle got a moment alone with her sister, she said, at least we're trying. So her and Jason were trying to be romantic, to go out on dates, to make it work. They even had a picture taken of them that night. They looked happy. It seemed hard to believe that Michelle would be dead just days later. Meredith said they were still arguing on Halloween and on November 1st, with Michelle telling her that she had had enough. The pettiness from him would not stop. And he even had the audacity to say to Michelle, if you just let me have a woman on the side, it would just make this a lot easier. Wow. But the thing is, even though he was quite the a-hole at times, would this be enough? But the investigators still had to ask, why would Jason want his wife dead? And if he did, why would he need to take such extreme measures to do it? It was brutal. Investigators were targeting Jason because they thought he had the answer to those questions, which could be fairly straightforward. But the path to justice for Michelle would be anything but. Jason Young had a secret. It's one of the oldest secrets in the book, and I'm sure if I pause for just a second, you can guess what it is. Jason worked as a traveling salesman, often taking him away from home for days at a time. But in the years since he'd been married to Michelle, his trips away had become less about business and more about pleasure. So, as I said, he was getting what he wanted, and a lot of it, just not from his wife. Detectives wanted to ask Jason all about this, but he lawyered up right away. And on the advice of counsel, he refused to speak to detectives, and he never even asked how his wife died, which they thought was very odd from day one. So without Jason talking, they decided to take a closer look at his most recent trip to Hillsville, Virginia, which was about 170 miles away from Raleigh, and detectives calculated that it would have taken Jason about 6 hours to drive from the hotel to Raleigh, commit the murder, and then return to Hillsville. It was doable. Actually, it would have almost exactly lined up with the last time he was seen on CCTV footage at the hotel close to midnight. The detectives speculated that if Jason had left the hotel to drive to Raleigh, he would have more than 7 hours to complete the drive, commit the murder, and return to Hillsville. This would have given him enough time to cover the distance, carry out the crime, and be back in that place where he made the phone call and it pinged in Virginia on the morning of November 3rd. Jason actually showed up for a sales meeting in Clintwood 30 minutes late. And after that meeting, he drove straight to his parents' house as planned. This timeline raised suspicions. So investigators visited that Hampton Inn in Hillsville to question the staff and search for clues. Jason had checked into room 421, but at the time investigators arrived, housekeeping had already cleaned that room. They used phenolphthalein again to see if there were any traces of blood, and they found none. Now, the surveillance footage from the hotel's front desk was pulled, and while it's dark and grainy, as per usual, it showed Jason arriving between 10:49 p.m. and 10:51 p.m. on the night of November 2nd. He was wearing a light-colored long-sleeve shirt with buttons. Jason was seen entering his room at 10:56 p.m., and that was the only time his plastic key card was used to unlock that door according to the records they had. However, at 11:59, Jason reappeared at the front desk wearing a different shirt, a dark, long-sleeve pullover with a light stripe across the chest. Shortly thereafter, a second camera captured him heading towards the west exit near the stairwell. That was the last time Jason was seen on hotel security footage that night. We're going to come back to this in detail, but further investigation at the hotel revealed another suspicious detail. A small landscaping rock that were found all along the paths of this hotel outside was actually wedged in the emergency exit door at the west end of the hotel, just feet from where Jason was last seen on that camera. The staff member who found this rock explained to the detectives that it had been placed in a way to keep the door open so that someone wouldn't have to use their key card. That's very interesting and very suspicious. The rock was kicked away by the staff, allowing the door to finally close. Since the door required a key card access from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., the detectives suspected that Jason placed that rock there to keep the door open in case he had to return to the hotel, and he didn't want to use his key because he knew it was going to log that it was his key opening that door. Now, compounding the investigators' concern, a staff member informed them of another suspicious aspect of this visit. One of the surveillance cameras near that same west stairwell had been tampered with. Yep, it had been unplugged. The last image that was captured by the camera was at 11:20 p.m. on November 2nd, just 30 minutes before Jason was seen heading in that direction. Is that a coincidence? I don't think it is, and neither did the detectives. It's not for nothing that Jason was their prime suspect. The camera had been plugged back in by a staff member only to be tampered with again. By 6:30 a.m. on November 3rd, the camera had been manually pushed upward, so its lens was facing the ceiling, and it wouldn't be able to capture anything down that hallway. The series of suspicious actions and the gaps in the hotel security footage just fueled the investigators' growing suspicions that Jason had found a way to leave the hotel, commit the murder of his wife, and return, all while avoiding leaving a clear trail back to him. Furthermore, Jason had not actually formally checked out of the hotel, which wasn't unusual at the time. They had express checkout. You didn't have to go to the front desk, and he didn't. The staff members explained that they delivered checkout receipts by sliding them under the doors between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., along with copies of USA Today placed on the door handles. These details helped to form a clear picture of Jason's movements around the time of Michelle's murder. Investigators also examined the gas receipts found in Jason's car. The first receipt was from Hardy Hugo's near downtown Raleigh. It was time-stamped at 7:32 p.m. on November 2nd. This would have been as he was leaving town, so he got gas before he left. The second receipt came from a place called the Get It Mart in Duffield, Virginia, and it was recorded at 12:06 p.m. on November 3rd. Now, between these two transactions, no other gas receipts were found. That raised doubts whether he could have made the entire 500-mile round trip on a single 22.5-gallon tank of gas. So the detectives thought he could have gotten gas somewhere between Raleigh and Hillsville during the early morning hours of November 3rd, likely between 4 and 6 a.m., but he probably paid in cash. So this led them to search different gas stations to see if there was any evidence, and this led them to Four Brothers BP gas station on Highway 52 in King, North Carolina. This was just north of Winston-Salem. I'm showing it on a map. A cashier on duty that morning, Gracie Calhoun, remembered an incident involving a man who fit Jason's description. He's pretty hard to forget. She said he was approximately 30 years old, he was white, and he was driving a Ford Explorer. Now, the thing was, there was a policy at this particular chain of gas stations. Customers that were purchasing gas before the sun came up needed to show either an ID or a credit card for verification before the gas would be turned on. Well, Jason pulled into this gas station and pulled into the pump, but not just any pump. He almost strategically pulled in to a pump that was not near the front door, so furthest away from any possible cameras or anybody seeing him. But the thing was, the fuel wouldn't come out, and he got very angry. He wanted to pay by cash. He didn't want to have to talk to anyone. But Gracie told him he needed to produce the documents required, just like everybody else. He was standing by the pump and he kept pushing the button to select the gas, which usually triggers it to flow, but it wasn't happening. And he kept doing it again and again. And inside, Gracie was just pushing it off. So it was kind of this back and forth and he was getting agitated. And then finally, someone inside that was a regular of the gas station, he opened the door and he yelled out to Jason. He's like, "Hey, listen, buddy, you need to come inside. There's no way around it." So Jason had to go inside this establishment. And when he did, he wasn't nice about it. He swore at Gracie. He was insulting her, and he just threw a $20 bill on the counter. You're allowed to use cash. You just have to come in. He ended up pumping $15 in gas, and he didn't even come to get his change. So because there was this interaction, it made Gracie remember Jason's face and his vehicle. It stuck in her memory. Yeah, not good for him. The detectives reviewed the gas station's transaction records from the morning of November 3rd, and there was one for $20 in cash at 5:36 a.m. The timing fit into the theory that Jason could have refueled shortly before returning to the Hampton Inn and tampering with his cameras at 6:30 a.m. as he re-entered that hotel. The fact that he put gas in his vehicle would contradict his alibi. If he had only made the trip there, he wouldn't have needed to refuel. Yikes. And the location of the station being on the Raleigh side of the hotel also matched up with him having driven home after checking in. But the detectives needed more. They continued to dig into Jason's behavior in the days leading up to Michelle's murder. And that's when they uncovered that Jason had exchanged over 400 messages and calls in the month before Michelle's death with a woman also named Michelle Money. And I'm sure you remember, or you may have remembered this name. I've said it before. This is one of Michelle's closest friends from college, her sorority sister. And you know what? I'm going to say, I don't think they were that good of friends after you hear this. They had those nicknames. Remember Big Michelle and Little Michelle? On the day Meredith discovered Michelle's body, Jason and Michelle, Money, had spoken over 50 times. 50. Why? When Linda, Michelle's mother, tried to reach Jason to tell him that his wife had been killed, her calls went unanswered. You know why? Because he was talking to Miss Money. I'm going to call her Miss Money so that we don't get them confused. Jason was engrossed in his conversation with Miss Money that he let Linda's calls go straight to voicemail, further raising suspicions about his priorities and his actions surrounding his wife's murder. Michelle's funeral was attended by over 200 people. Many of the mourners were the same friends and family who gathered to celebrate Jason and Michelle's wedding just 3 years earlier. The contrast between the two events was stark. What had been a joyful occasion was now a devastating goodbye. Jason placed Michelle's favorite flowers, yellow and orange daisies, on top of her casket. But of course, just because someone's cheating doesn't mean they've committed murder. So as the investigation progressed, the DNA results were back. The only bloody fingerprints found in the entire home belonged to Cassidy, and all of the other blood recovered, including small drops downstairs, was confirmed to be Michelle's. Jason's fingerprints and DNA were of course found at the scene because he lived there. That was to be expected. This made it very hard to distinguish between what was normal and what might be incriminating. Now, the full shoe prints were identified as a size 10 Air Fit or Franklin athletic shoe, and the partial print was consistent with a size 12 Hush Puppy Orbital Sealy shoe. Jason did wear a size 12, but since there was two different sizes of shoes at the crime scene, they wondered, could there have been two perpetrators? Or did someone purposely bring two pairs of shoes to throw detectives off? Unfortunately, both models of these shoes have been discontinued. They were no longer in stores. But during a previous search of Jason and Michelle's home, detectives had noticed a DSW reward card. So they got a search warrant, and they obtained a printout of purchases made with that card. On July 4th of 2005, Jason had purchased 4 pairs of shoes that day, including a brown pair of Hush Puppies Orbital shoes in size 12. As investigators continued to review the surveillance videos from November 2nd of 2006, they noticed something critical. Jason seemed to be wearing a pair of Hush Puppies at that Cracker Barrel. And later he was seen wearing the same shoes as he walked towards the west end of the Hampton Inn building just before midnight. It seemed like a lot of evidence was still pointing to Jason. But to learn more about Miss Money had actually been friends with Michelle, but she met Jason at Michelle and Jason's wedding. That's right. She was a bridesmaid in her wedding. And then she goes on to have an affair with her husband. Even though Miss Money had moved to Florida and was married, her and Michelle kept in touch over the years. And just recently, in September of 2006, a couple months before Michelle was murdered, Miss Money and all of Michelle's sorority friends came to have a visit and stayed at Jason and Michelle's home and went to a football game together. And while Miss Money was staying at her supposed very good friend, best friend, sorority sister's house with her husband, she decides to play a game of hide and seek with everyone. And while she's hiding, this is like grown people playing hide and seek, which is a little weird in and of itself. But while she's playing hide and seek, her and Jason are hiding in the same spot. And they get to talking. And in their conversation, somehow, Miss Money's marriage comes up. And she confides in her best friend's husband, Jason, that her marriage is kind of falling apart, that she suspected her husband is cheating. And Jason's trying to give her supposed advice. By the end of that weekend, when Miss Money was going to return home, her and Jason had had a couple other conversations about this, and he gave his expert opinion. I say that because this man's cheating, so I guess he's an expert in it. And he tells her, you know what, I think your husband is cheating on you. So what does she do? She starts forming a relationship with Jason. They exchange phone numbers. They're talking every single day from September up until even after Michelle is murdered. And I find it so hard to believe that women do this to each other. I think the best thing to do in a situation where maybe your friend's husband's flirting with you is to tell your friend. But it seemed like both of them were confiding that both of their marriages were falling apart. Michelle and Jason's marriage and Miss Money's marriage. So as Miss Money and Jason are confiding in one another, she says that their relationship just started to grow to the point where they told each other that they wanted to be more than friends. They're both married, but they want to be more than friends. Miss Money told the detectives that Michelle and Jason were fighting a lot more, and he was gone a lot. So they came up with a little plan. She said she doesn't remember whose idea it was, but they were going to pretend, or Jason was going to pretend, that he was gone on another business trip, but instead, he was with Miss Money because her husband was gone as well. I mean, she immediately admitted to having an affair with him. That she didn't hold back, and she told them everything. She revealed that he lied to his wife in October and that he was in Orlando with her, spending the weekend together, being sexual together, and then they continued that relationship. Rather than really trying to work it out with his wife, he was sharing all of his thoughts and feelings with one of her best friends, and it makes me so mad. Miss Money was more than happy to provide a shoulder for Jason to lean on. The detectives obtained a search warrant for Miss Money's computer, and as they sifted through the emails exchanged between her and Jason, several stood out. One in particular was from October 28th, just 6 days before Michelle was murdered. Both Jason and Miss Money had professed their love for one another in those messages. He's a sleazeball and she's a crappy friend, but was it enough for a motive for murder? That's what they wanted to find out. In the meanwhile, following Michelle's funeral, Jason was given sole primary custody of Cassidy. And right away, he sent her to live with Heather and her husband. He said he wanted to shield her from the intense media scrutiny. And this sudden decision left Michelle's family devastated. Linda had no idea that Cassidy was taken away until she was already gone. She hadn't even had a chance to say goodbye to her granddaughter. Jason then moved in with his mother in Brevard, and from that point on, he controlled when and how Linda and Meredith could see or speak to Cassidy, which is just heartbreaking. That little girl was so sweet, and after all she witnessed and losing her mother, now she was losing part of her family as well, and she was the only piece of Michelle that her family had left, and she was ripped away. In March of 2007, 4 months after Michelle's murder, when Cassidy turned 3, Linda was invited to her birthday party, which was held at Jason's mother's house. However, when Linda asked if she could throw a separate party for Cassidy, Jason and his mother refused. Now, throughout the spring and summer of 2007, Linda made 5-hour drives so she could have supervised visits with Cassidy at a hotel. All of these visits had to be organized by Jason's mother, and they could only last a couple hours and were heavily controlled. I'm thinking, like, what are they scared of? What are they scared of? They're scared that this little girl is probably going to say, I saw daddy beating mommy to death. I think that's why they were trying to keep her away from her grandma. Just my speculation. Jason never attended any of these meetings, and Linda was closely watched at every visit. At one point, when Cassidy needed to use the restroom, Linda took her inside the stall, but Jason's mother had to stand outside. Jason's mom said it was because she thought that Linda was going to kidnap her granddaughter. Wow. This whole family on Jason's side seemed a bit off. But maybe they had their reasons, because they claimed the police had zeroed in on Jason from the very beginning, not looking into anyone else. And I know it's hard. It's his family. They love him. They want to support him. But I'd beg to differ. I say the detectives were actually following the evidence, but the tensions between these two families came to a head in the fall of 2007. Linda and Jason's mother, Pat, got into an argument because Pat suggested that Linda should defend Jason more in the media. Meredith, in turn, said, you know what, we would gladly support Jason if he started cooperating with police, because he had never, ever spoken to police about his wife's murder. After this, Jason and his mom cut off all contact between Linda, Meredith, and Cassidy. They informed Linda they were no longer going to allow Cassidy to speak or see her, and I hate when children are in the middle of disputes like this. It's truly sad. Well, despite these restrictions, Linda and Meredith, they found out where Cassidy was going to daycare, and they started visiting her at daycare around her 4th birthday. And during one of these visits, during Mother's Day, Cassidy even styled Meredith and Linda's hair and put makeup on them, and this was such a memorable event, but it was soon going to be put to an end because Jason and Pat found out that Linda and Meredith had been seeing Cassidy behind their back, and they took action. They informed the daycare director not to ever let them around Cassidy again. This was devastating. Even though they were going behind Pat and Jason's back, they felt they had a right to their granddaughter and they didn't want to be cut off from her. They longed for her to be a part of their lives. And as this criminal investigation kept dragging on with no resolution, Michelle's loved ones decided to pursue a civil case against Jason to hold him accountable for Michelle's death. Their primary goal was to invoke the Slayer statute. I had never heard of this before. But this is a statute that would prevent Jason from receiving that life insurance payout. And this life insurance policy, by the way, they found out at this time while they're doing investigations, it wasn't just $2 million. It actually increased. It had a double indemnity clause in it. This meant that it was now a $4 million policy because of Michelle's death. Wow. So if there wasn't enough of a motive, there was now. Jason could easily be thinking in his head, he can choose whatever mistress he wants and ride off into the sunset together with all of this money. Detectives advised Michelle's family to take the civil route, explaining that the discovery process in a civil case would force Jason to testify under oath, something that he refused to do during the criminal investigation. However, the statute of limitations for filing a wrongful death lawsuit was 2 years, and that deadline was looming. So Michelle's family made their move, and on October 29, 2008, just 5 days before the statute of limitation would expire, attorneys Paul and Jack Michaels, representing Michelle's mother, Linda, filed a civil lawsuit against Jason. The complaint alleged that Jason Young had brutally murdered Michelle in the early morning hours of November 3, 2006 at their home. Linda sought compensation for the pain and suffering that Michelle had endured and the loss of her daughter's income, which would have helped support Cassidy. She also sought punitive damages to hold Jason accountable for Michelle's death, and most importantly, asked the court to declare Jason a slayer under that Slayer statute, thereby barring him from collecting any of the life insurance proceeds. This hearing took place on December 5, 2008, and no one appeared on Jason's behalf. Linda's attorney, Jack Michaels, presented the judge with 3 sworn affidavits, one from himself, one from his brother Paul, the other attorney, and one from the lead detective in Michelle's murder investigation. These affidavits strongly implicated Jason in Michelle's death. After reviewing the evidence in these affidavits, the judge issued a ruling. Jason Young had willfully and unlawfully killed Michelle, making him a slayer under the law. And as a result, he was barred from accessing any of the insurance policy proceeds. This was a victory for Michelle's family, not only financially, but also in their ongoing custody battle. With this ruling, Linda and Meredith were now able to publicly refer to Jason as Michelle's killer. And this was leverage. It gave them additional power in their efforts to maintain contact and not be kept away from Cassidy. As a result of the civil suit, Jason was also ordered to pay Michelle's family $15 million. The civil suit was just one small victory. Michelle's family had not given up on justice, and investigators swore that they had not given up either. Then on December 17, 2008, Linda filed a formal custody dispute, further escalating the tensions between the two families. In this complaint, Linda was allowed to refer to Jason as Michelle's killer, and she emphasized that it was believed that Cassidy, their young daughter, had been present during the murder. This complaint highlighted everything: the tensions between the two families, the arguing before the murder, and eventually, a custody hearing was set for February 4th of 2009. But you know what happened? Jason didn't fight. Unexpectedly, he just decided to let Cassidy go. He reached out to Linda's legal team, and he said, "You can have her." They were shocked that Jason would just give up custody of Cassidy to Meredith and Michelle's family just like that. Under this agreement, Meredith would have permanent custody of Cassidy, while Jason could be granted visitation every other weekend during the school year and over the summers. The detectives believed that the fear of incriminating himself in the ongoing investigation likely played a role in his decision to keep quiet and just give up custody. That allowed him to avoid direct questioning about the events of that fateful night. He's so guilty, and yet he's still not behind bars. That must have been so frustrating for Michelle's family. The investigation into Michelle Young's murder took several key turns as detectives pieced together more evidence from the crime scene. Jason's behavior, his digital footprint, the shirt that Jason was wearing during that second appearance on camera at the Hampton Inn, the long sleeve pullover, was never found in his luggage. So investigators believe this shirt, potentially covered in blood, had been discarded. One thing, though, that kept looming over the detectives' heads was that the person who killed Michelle must have cared and therefore spared Cassidy. It only made sense that Jason would do that. Evidence kept stacking against him. Detectives theorized that Jason created a ruse to ensure that Meredith would be the one to discover Michelle's body, staging that request to print out the eBay auction information as a reason for her to go into that house. Emails found on Jason's computer painted a troubling picture of his mindset in the months leading up to Michelle's murder. In one email from July 12, 2006, Jason vented his frustration about parenting. He wrote this to Michelle, quote, "I just got home and the goddamn power is out. I called Progress Energy and a crew is already out. Cass pissed herself all over the floor. It's hot as hell inside and I can't entertain her enough without TV to finish the goddamn yard. I'm taking a beer and her to the pool. I'm in a mood that makes our trip to Myrtle seem mild. Pray the beer kicks in. I could kill you for not letting me finish the yard this morning," end quote. This email raised red flags about Jason's temper and his careless use of violent language towards Michelle. In yet another discovery, Jason had sent an email to his former fiancée, Genevieve Cargol, who was now married and living in Austin, Texas. And in this message, Jason professed his love for her, telling her that she was haunting his dreams. There were equally troubling, suspicious internet searches found on Jason's computer, including, quote, anatomy of a knockout, head trauma knockout, divorce, and this unusual one, which will make sense in 1 second, right posterior perioptical region. I can't even say that. Basically, it's like the right side of someone's face and head. Why would he be looking that up? Well, it seemed like it would be a great place to punch someone right there and knock them out. These search terms, coupled with the physical evidence, the digital trail, and everything else, painted a picture of a man potentially preparing to have a deadly confrontation. It was a frustrating situation for investigators because despite all their suspicions and the evidence that they had, this was still largely circumstantial. The questionable mileage, the malfunctioning hotel cameras, the DNA left gaps in the timeline that Jason could easily exploit with his defense. But finally, in December of 2009, a grand jury indicted Jason Young for Michelle's murder. 2 days later, on December 4th, 2009, Jason was arrested, and his trial began in June of 2011, 5 years after Michelle's murder. The prosecution built their case around the argument that Jason had killed Michelle because he no longer wanted to be married. He was a womanizer who needed his wife out of the picture. They alleged that Jason longed to live a life as a single man, free from the responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood, all with Michelle's life insurance policy to fund his new life of freedom. The evidence in the case included the shoes that he was seen wearing that were now missing, and also left prints, Jason's suspicious behavior, the hotel discrepancies, the digital data, the unraveling marriage, the multiple affairs, including the one with Miss Money where he professed his love to her. I'm sure there were a lot that they didn't know about, and the circumstances of the murder, which painted a compelling case for the state, leading to a trial that would attempt to bring justice for Michelle Young's brutal death. They called a number of witnesses, and I really do want to highlight at least a couple of these clips of their testimonies while they were on the stand. Many of Jason and Michelle's friends said they knew that all he wanted was sex.
The arguments, I would say, they continued. Jason made it very well known that, he was upset about the lack of sex in the relationship.
And when you said Jason made it well known over his dissatisfaction with sex in the marriage, that's something that he would discuss in group settings?
In front of us, yes, certainly openly, certainly sometimes at tailgates.
Were those arguments that would be had with Michelle standing there?
Sometimes, yes.
Michelle Money took the stand and talked about their relationship and how it progressed.
Like I said, we did talk that one evening, and, I felt like we were friends, and I needed someone to talk to, so we would call each other, and it basically grew very quickly. We just started talking all day about anything, football, potty training, mortgages, anything that you would talk to a friend about.
Every day?
Yes.
Did you speak on the phone?
Yes.
And Jason's friend Dalton told the jury he thought that Jason was in love with Miss Money. Not only that, there was another mistress that took the stand. Days before the murder, he had a random hookup with none other than the girl who used to have a crush on him back when he was a camp counselor. I briefly mentioned her in the beginning for this reason. Her name, Carol Ann Sowerby. This happened in the living room of Jason and Michelle's home. I was so disgusted, and I have to play this for you, followed by something else he did that I found vile. Listen for yourself.
I met him at a summer camp that I went to as a child, and I've known him probably since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. Yeah, I don't know that they called the male staff counselors, but essentially, yes, he was teaching. After I stopped going to camp, we would still get together to go on kayaking adventures, weekend type trips, and there was a small group of us that kind of stayed in touch. When I would come back to the East Coast, I would try to, make the most of my time here and visiting other people. Cassidy was put down to bed and had a couple drinks, just were talking, and we ended up having sex.
Ms. Sowerby, you indicated that you were intimate with the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that take place? What part of the house?
On the couch in the living room.
Why not just leave? Why would you stay there and let this happen? Well, there's one reason why she couldn't just leave so easily. Carol Ann was married. Jason knew that, and it seems like they were having a conversation about it, and somehow Jason was able to convince her to take off her wedding ring, at which point he proceeded to swallow both of Carol Ann's wedding rings, her wedding band and her wedding ring. This man swallowed her rings so that she couldn't leave because, this is so gross and vile and disgusting, he had to poop them out before she could return home. I have never heard of such a thing in my life. What is going on here?
And do you recall an incident involving your wedding ring?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jury what happened?
We were sitting around the dinner table, and there was some mention of jewelry, and it was just a simple, "Can I see your ring?" And I guess I handed it or gave it, or, handed my hand over or whatever.
You indicated either handed over the ring or held out your hand.
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember exactly what happened.
Okay. Well, what was the next thing that happened?
He pretended to swallow it, or swallowed it. I don't know if it really happened or not.
What did you see him do?
Just like that.
What was your reaction?
I mean, first I thought it was a joke and was like, all right, enough, give it back. And I was told that I couldn't get it back until it passed. And I was, at first it was typical joke, and then I was annoyed because it was my wedding ring. And then the next day he gave it back to me.
But not only that, guess who else testified? His ex-fiancée, Genevieve. And she also talked about a situation where Jason wanted her ring, but it was because they were breaking up, and Jason wanted the ring back because he purchased it. He wasn't going to let her get away with the ring because he wanted the money. Well, she told the jury that they had a physical altercation where he was throwing her around the room demanding the ring. I'm going to let you hear it for yourself.
I asked him if he remembered what had happened at lunch.
And what were you referring to?
The drinking at lunch. And I asked him about the agreement that we had made about not drinking as much. He became agitated. This is not a direct quote, but he said something to the effect of, "If I'm going to make such a terrible husband, then give me my ring back." I told him in so many words that that wasn't going to happen. We had never had the ring sized, and the ring was always about a half an inch too small. So on a normal day, when I wasn't hot and sweaty and nervous and emotional, I had to hold my hand well above my heart and let the blood drain for a little while before I could get the ring off of my finger. Well, I was nervous and reminded him that there was no way that the ring was going to come off. At that point, that's when he became extremely agitated with me and then came after me to get the ring. He began trying to pull the ring off and it wouldn't come off. So at that point, I was becoming very emotional and upset, and he was pushing me around the room. He was throwing me from one bed to the other, and I was slipping and pulling and trying to, whenever I neared the floor, trying to get onto the bed, and jumping on me with all his weight and pinning my arms, both of them, behind me. so hard that I felt like my arms were going to come out of the sockets, the shoulder. I saw his face and his eyes were glazed over and didn't show any emotion. I don't remember verbatim what I was saying, but I know that I was screaming and yelling for him to get off of me, and was very upset. I would get close to the floor and I just try to pull myself back to the bed because I knew that that was going to be the place to be where I wouldn't get hurt the most. Eventually he did get the ring off. It did cut my finger when he pulled it off.
So sure, he was a jerk. He was a cheater. But was he a murderer? I think one of the saddest testimonies I heard was from Linda's mom. Linda's mom was a great mom. And that's why Jason wanted her out of the picture. I'm telling you, it makes sense. She could see through his facade. She knew he wasn't a good person. I'm going to let you hear something from her now.
Had you witnessed arguments and fights between your daughter Michelle and the defendant?
It was, yes, I have, but I also witnessed a lot of belittling, mocking her and putting her down. She seemed to be more unhappy than happy. She was always talking about negative things, that things weren't going right. And then when a day came that something was good, she was just like, oh, you should see how, how great it was. And then that was gone. I mean, there were points, and she was holding on to those points. When I was there that last time in October, we were sitting watching TV, and she had her head on my lap, and she was lying out, and I was stroking her hair, and she was empty. She was just, it was almost like nothing to live for. Things weren't working out with Jason. Before we left, I was telling him about, he had said to me that things aren't good because, she doesn't want to have sex with him. And I was telling him, that you don't want to go down that path of having another woman on the side, and it would definitely end the marriage. There would be no hope. She was defeated. She had so much to offer. There was so much about Michelle that was just, she was an NC State cheerleader. I mean, she had that pep, that energy, that vivacious, she loved life. And he took it away from her. Just took it away from her.
Ms. Fisher, how did you learn about Michelle's death?
Meredith. And she said, Mom, Michelle is DEAD. And I'm like, what do you mean? That can't be. Did she just pass out? Maybe she just passed out. It's just, you gotta be wrong. It can't be.
So with all of this, sometimes I have to think to myself, why wouldn't Jason just get a divorce? Well, he had told his friends that that was not an option. He didn't want to lose custody of Cassidy, and he didn't want Michelle to move back to New York where he wouldn't be able to see her. But I think the reason was he didn't want to have to pay child support in the event that he would have to owe her anything. Michelle's close friend Shelley said that their marriage was horrible. That's how she defined Jason and Michelle's marriage. Horrible. But as the prosecution anticipated, Jason's defense lawyers systematically dismantled each and every piece of evidence. How? Well, they decided to put Jason on the stand. This was the very first time he would ever make a statement in relation to Michelle's murder. When asked point blank if he killed her, this is what Jason said.
State your name, please.
Jason Young.
Jason, did you love your wife, Michelle?
Yes, sir, I did.
Were you a proper husband to her?
No, sir, I was not.
Do you love Cassidy?
Absolutely.
Are
Yes,
you a
sir.
good father to her?
Yes, sir, I am.
Did you kill your wife, Michelle?
No, sir.
Were you there when it happened?
No, sir.
Do you know who did it?
No, sir, I do not.
He admitted that he was the one who left the hotel door propped open, but he said it was an innocent mistake because he accidentally left his key card in his room when he went outside to get his laptop charger from his car. After getting the charger, he went back to his room, but then he left one more time to smoke a cigar. And then he went to the front desk to get a copy of USA Today newspaper to look at the sports schedule. That's what he was doing at the front desk at midnight, and there's footage of him going back to his room with the paper. He said that he never left his room until the next morning. That's when he realized he forgot to bring the eBay printouts with him for the anniversary gift.
Well, I had realized that I had left the coach stuff that I printed out on the computer, and I didn't want Michelle to see that. I wanted it to be a big
When
surprise.
did you first realize that you had left it in your house?
I realized that after my meeting, after I came out with my meeting from with Miss Sproles, and I was loading my car up, my computer bag and stuff like that, and when I'm putting that stuff, loading it back in, I realized I didn't bring those papers. And
Why
so,
was it important to you that somebody get those papers?
because I wanted it to be a surprise. We had, I discussed, we'd had a pretty big fight, the one where she said that I threw the remote, and on top of that, I was getting, you have heard testimony about, I kind of got scolded from Linda and some people about not doing enough for the anniversary, and their anniversary meal didn't go right, so I really was wanting to kind of make up for a lot in a big way, and I really wanted it to be a surprise. A surprise to Michelle means so much more.
He said he was 30 minutes late to a sales meeting because he got lost.
Well, the start of the directions, the interstate 77 to 81 was really easy. As you got off onto some of the smaller highways and started getting up into the mountainy area, trying to follow the directions, there were some directions that were, you need 0.1 miles, veer, like it got tricky, and I got lost.
Did that cause you to be late to your meeting?
Yes, sir.
About how late?
About 30 minutes late, maybe.
Here's what he said he felt like when he first heard the news of Michelle's murder.
I remember it was a sunny day. I remember having, I think, the window down, and I remember driving in and seeing my mom and Gerald drive or kind of standing in the yard, and they're.
Was that odd?
Well, they were kind of holding each other, and they kind of were walking towards the car. And I had been petting the dog, and I remember getting out of the car and walking towards them. And you can kind of tell when your mom's upset, and and my stepdad, when he's upset, which you don't really see him like cry that much. You can tell that there's something wrong. And I thought that there's something wrong with my grandma. And I think I said, "Is it me, mommy?" Which is my grandma. And I remember that's when Gerald told me it was Michelle, and he said Michelle's dead.
What did you do?
I just fell. I broke on the inside. I just broke, and I didn't believe it. It just didn't feel real. It didn't feel like it was. It didn't feel like it was happening. I didn't believe it, and I didn't understand it.
And what happened next?
I remember going inside the house, and I just remember crying, and I remember sobbing. And I remember just feeling really, really hot, and then I would feel really, really cold, and I really don't remember that much.
And I was starting to ask you, do you have some memory, some difficulty remembering specific events and times for a while after that?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have to say, he's pretty damn believable. He's a really good witness. And what I mean by that is if you're a bad witness on the stand, you might be nervous, you might make the jury not like you might seem like you're lying, but he's just like cool, calm, collected, charming even. He kind of reminds me of like a Disney prince. I mean, he's nothing like a Disney prince, but the way he looks with the long hair and the smile, yeah. But other people know another side of him. When asked why he never talked to the police, he had an explanation for that. It was all his lawyer. And what about him throwing his ex-fiancée around the room? Well, this is what he said. He just wanted his ring back. But what about Michelle? Well, he said he loved Michelle. He wanted to stay with her. He didn't want a divorce. How about the fact that he gave up custody of his daughter? Well, his explanation was that he lost his job due to being under the microscope by investigators, and he couldn't afford a family law attorney to fight Linda. Again, I have to say that Jason understood the assignment. He's believable, but a lot of times, that's the way criminals are. That's how they think they'll get away with it all. But like I said, there was another side to Jason. His friends had seen it, especially when he'd been drinking. But there were things that the defense brought up. That the jewelry box in the bedroom had another person's DNA found on it. And so did one of those cameras. It had someone else's fingerprint on it. As for those internet searches, his defense said, oh, those were not what you thought. He was involved in witnessing an accident, so he was Googling a few things in case he was questioned about it. There was no forensic evidence tying him to the crime. No blood, no injuries found on him. Well, prosecutor Becky Holt was ready to tear apart every one of Jason's claims. She went hard. On cross-examination, she was ferocious. She asked him, were you working on your marriage when you were effing Carol Ann on the couch less than 2 weeks before Michelle was found dead? Of course, he said no.
Mr. Young, you said that you testified here before this jury that you were working on your marriage.
I think marriage is something that people are always working on.
Were you working on your marriage when you were having sex with Carol Ann Sowerby in your home less than 2 weeks before your wife was murdered?
No, ma'am, that was not the way to work on a marriage. That was very detrimental.
Then she asked him, were you working on your marriage when you were talking to Miss Money? No.
You said you've talked to Michelle Money. You talked to her a lot. In fact, you know that the police have documented over 400 times that you had contact with her in a very short, in a month's period. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working on your marriage when you called Michelle Money?
Michelle and I confided a lot in each other, and we talked about my issues with my wife, and she talked about her issues with her husband, and we both tried to kind of help each other out in regards to things we could do to make the other person more loving towards us.
So is the answer yes when you had an affair with Michelle Money, that you were working on your marriage?
No, ma'am. Having the sexual intercourse and having the intimacy was very detrimental to that.
I love the way he says, like, we're good friends. No, you were having an affair. He wasn't just your good friend. After an hour of cross-examination, the case was finally handed over to the jury. And when it came time for deliberation, there was no way of knowing which way the jury would swing. And it turns out they didn't swing either way because in the end, they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. They were deadlocked, 8-4 in favor of actually acquitting this man. So the judge was forced to declare a mistrial. This was a devastating blow for Michelle's family. He charmed them, didn't he? I thought he could, and he did. However, the declaration of a mistrial came without prejudice, so guess what? The prosecution was free to file the exact same charges, and they did. Just 7 months later, Jason's second murder trial got underway in March of 2012. This time, the prosecution doubled down on their efforts to show that Jason wasn't who he said he was. Still, there was no forensic evidence found, but there were plenty of witnesses who painted a picture which didn't look anything like the happy family life that Jason was trying to convince everyone of. The gas station attendant, she was pivotal. She testified that Jason was the one she saw at 5:30 that morning, giving her a hard time and cussing at her. This contradicted his claim that he was asleep at his hotel. But some of the most heart-wrenching testimony came from Cassidy's daycare teacher, who shared that she had watched a little girl playing with dolls in the days after her mother's murder. And while she was sitting there, she had dolls in her hands, and one was hitting the other one with a chair. And she said that Mommy was getting a spanking for biting. And when she laid down the dolls, she said that Mommy had boo-boos all over her and red stuff. The prosecution hit home the fact that there had been a silent witness left behind, and they really showcased the significance of Cassidy not only being spared, but being washed up. Cassidy would have had to feel comfortable with whoever was helping her, because there was a time where Shelley, who was Michelle's best friend, tried to change Cassidy's diaper the night she was over there watching Grey's Anatomy, and Cassidy wouldn't let her. So it had to be someone that this little girl trusted, someone like her father. In this trial, they also brought forward the facts in that civil lawsuit, the one where Jason was found guilty of the brutal murder of Michelle. He never refuted those claims. And even though this judge told the jury that didn't mean he was guilty in this criminal court, hearing those words had to have an effect on their perspective, especially when it was revealed that it was the same judge. It was Judge Stevens who signed the civil judgment. So essentially, the jury is going to infer that Judge Stevens already thought Jason was guilty. This time, Jason chose not to take the stand, but that didn't stop the prosecution from being able to play his whole testimony from the first trial. And then the prosecutor ripped it apart piece by piece, focusing on those eBay printouts. He printed them from the home computer before he left, but he took the MapQuest papers with him that were printed at the same time. Therefore, he left it on purpose because it was part of his plan. But he didn't think about the fact that the auctions, that are on the page he printed, would have been timed out when he was driving. Those auctions would have ended at 8 p.m. It doesn't make much sense for him to print out papers that he wouldn't actually need for any reason. But my favorite part is when they ripped apart his claim that he went outside to get his power cord for his laptop that night. Guess what? A digital forensic expert was able to look through the computer extraction. They found out he didn't even plug his computer in. That's right. The computer keeps a record of that. The defense, of course, made the same arguments that there's no physical evidence and that it didn't add up to Jason committing this crime. But the additional effort made by the investigators to secure more witnesses for the second trial paid off, because just 6 hours of deliberation and the jury found Jason guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. And during the sentencing, the judge made this statement. He said, quote, "The evidence suggests that an assailant was overcome completely by anger and rage, and even then, he had the energy to strip off Michelle's engagement and wedding rings because in his mind, she was unworthy of wearing them. Fingerprints of domestic violence are all over this case," end quote. Yeah, just like he tried to take his ex's ring too. Michelle's family embraced each other in tears. Jason's mother, on the other hand, just sat there straight-faced, seemingly in shock. Jason, of course, tried to appeal, and I'm not going to go into that because there's nothing special to relay to you. It was denied. And as we wrap up this story, it's clear that this case remains as controversial as ever. On one side, there are those who are convinced that Jason is responsible, but there are many people on the other side who argue that the evidence was too weak, the investigation was flawed, and that Jason was convicted on suspicion rather than proof. There's even a website dedicated to Jason's innocence. So I want to know, after hearing all the evidence, where do you stand? Is Jason Young a cold-blooded killer, or was he a man wrongly accused? Either way, the real victim here is little Cassidy, who lost both of her parents and probably has so much hidden trauma deep inside from that night when her little eyes witnessed her mom being killed. Her mommy loved her so much. And I want you to remember to spend as much time to love, to hug everyone you love tightly. I will see you in my next video. Bye.